House will come to order. The first bill on the calendar for the day is Senate File 1236. The clerk will report the bill.
Senate File 1236 on the calendar for the day, unofficially engrossed and reprinted for the House to include committee amendments, an act relating to higher education.
Representative Pelowski.
Members, the higher education finance bill that we have today will be a bill that addresses what has happened to higher education during the Great Recession. In Minnesota, we have had historic cuts. We have had historic tuition increases, and now we are getting the reports on the historic debt. We have burdened one generation with historic debt, and as these tuition increases have gone up, we may have priced the next generation out of higher education. We were given a target of $150 million over base. We met that target. We did not exceed it. So, how the money was spent. In MnSCU, there will not be an increase in tuition for undergraduates. Over the next 2 years, there will be a base increase of $78 million. In the University of Minnesota, there will be a base increase to cover a 3% and 3% increase, and that is where 80% of our money has gone directly to students. This will be the first time that students will not see an increase in tuition. They will not have to borrow, and I am hopeful that with these base increases and with the accountability that we have in the bill, we can return to access affordability in higher education. The other money went to the grant program and the independent students, about $10 million. We also gave the University of Minnesota half of what it wanted for research and what it called MnDrive, and if you want me to break that down, I can. So members, this is a very lean bill. It may spend $150 million, but that goes almost 80% to students. It starts us back on actually obeying state law. In state law, we are to cover 2/3 of the costs of a student's education. Now, it's actually the reverse. The students pay for 2/3 to 3/4, and the state assists them in the rest of their educational costs. The accountability in this bill is also rather unique. Almost all of the accountability language was drafted by the legislative auditor. In that accountability language, both the University of Minnesota and the MnSCU system will have to act before they receive the money to stabilize that tuition. We also have reporting information. We spent, in the Higher Education Committee, 14 hearings just on budget. 5 on the MnSCU system, 5 on the University of Minnesota's current budget, and then 2 on their budget requests, for a total of 14 hearings just on budget. We will continue this over the interim. You will hear me probably in reference to some of these amendments. There will be interim hearings. It will not be a working group. It will not be a task force. It will be a standing committee of the Minnesota House of Representatives taking a look at how we can restore legislative oversight to tuition. I would argue, members, that we should have the same level of oversight with tuition that we have for taxes. Tuition increases tend not to go away, and they tend to have the same lingering effects. In this case, historic debt. With that, members, I will stand for questions and/or amendments.
There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Drazkowski moving to amend Senate File 1236, the unofficial engrossment, as follows. The amendment is coded A8.
Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members, and thank you, Representative Pelowski, for your introduction of the bill. A8 basically deletes the portion or the amount that the study was spent by the university in order to figure out where their excesses in administration came in, and replaces that, or takes that and spends it instead on the state grant program, and encourage your support for the amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Pelowski.
Mr. Speaker, members, Representative Pelowski, I encourage the members to support your amendment.
Seeing no further discussion, all in favor of the amendment say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. Motion prevails. Amendment is adopted. There's another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Benson M. moving to amend Senate File 1236, the unofficial engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A1.
Representative Benson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I have an amendment to the amendment. A11.
There is an amendment to the amendment. The clerk will report the amendment.
Benson M. moving to amend his amendment to Senate File 1236, the unofficial engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A11.
Representative Benson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Speaker. Mr. Chairman Pelowski and members, first of all, I want to thank Chairman Pelowski for the work that he's done. I actually missed an opportunity, I think, not being on that committee this year to address many of the problems or concerns that I had 2 years ago when I think collectively we first became aware of all the issues regarding administrative overhead at the University of Minnesota and the MnSCU system. I know as we were winding down in that budget process, I presented both sides in the committee a detailed report that was completed over a 15-year period from the Goldwater Institute that culminated in a report being issued in August of 2010 that showed a direct correlation with administrative overhead increases and the cost of tuition in 100 institutions across the United States. And figuring very prominently in there was the University of Minnesota. So I understand the process, and I appreciate the work that's been put into the committee this year in order to address that. But I guess, members, somewhere along the line I must have had a relative in Missouri, the Show Me State, because, members, we're putting in to higher education almost the exact same amount that we're taking out of Health and Human Services. There are many people out there today who are going to express a desire to have some of that money come back through conference committee and the like, but the fact is we're putting $150 million in higher education and we're taking it out of Health and Human Services. And Chairman Pelowski, I thank you for the fine work, and I don't deny that we need to do something about higher education. I could almost vote for this bill, even with the fact that it's 150, but I don't think I can vote for it until I fully grasp or understand where we're going with making sure that the people in the administrative offices of both MnSCU and the University of Minnesota understand the gravity of the point where we're at in history regarding they need to turn this around. So members, what this amendment does, or these amendments do, is add some accountability, additional accountability, in requiring that the report that's in this bill, in fact, that would require that after the first year of appropriations, 2014, that in order to get that additional money over base in 2015, they're going to have to show some appreciable efficiency gains, 6% to be precise. And the amendment to the amendment really gets to it in terms of where that 6% would come from. So that would be it would be from three particular places: central administration, including top salaries, other personnel in HR, and the consolidation or elimination of departments, programs, or positions. It would give them the flexibility to take that money out in order to meet what I think is a responsible movement towards making them accountable to the state of Minnesota, the people of the state of Minnesota, and most importantly, I think Chairman Pelowski makes a good point. We have students out there that are exiting their education with horribly high debt, thanks to 15 years of unabated administrative overhead increases. So I've had conversation with the chairman, and I understand that this is a little bit to bite off. He's promised me that we'll have additional, and I expect that to happen. If there was one person I felt that I could trust to tackle this in the Higher Education Committee, it was Representative, now Chairman Pelowski, because he gets it. But I ask for a roll call, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Benson requests a roll call. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Pelowski.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Benson, we had this discussion, and I am extremely sympathetic with this. I'm going to ask members to vote no today. The oversight and accountability language that's in the bill was drafted by the legislative auditor. This took a series of meetings before we even came to what we now know as operative language. I would hope the members today would vote no and let us work on this and work on it over the interim so we would have language that would work. Accountability and oversight is difficult to do. And I want to make sure when we do it, it provides exactly what we think it should do. I passed out to you a sheet of the administrative salaries and bonuses of the MNSCU system from 2006 to 2012. And I agree with you. This has been excessive. They have raised tuition. In our very first hearing on the University of Minnesota's current budget, we took testimony and the statement was we raised tuition because we could. I then asked the question, did you raise it more than you needed to? There was no answer to that question, but I think the numbers speak for themselves. They did. So members, today I'm going to ask you to vote no, but I do promise you, Representative Benson, that we're not done with this. This is an ongoing accountability and oversight issue. This is legislative oversight. It's going to take us time to restore it. But we are going to restore it, and we're going to make sure that if any of these systems come to raise tuition again, there will be accountability as to how and why. So members, today vote no. Representative Benson, I can guarantee you, you are going to be before the Higher Ed Committee, and we're going to make sure that when we come back here in the next session, we will have accountability language.
Representative Benson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Show me. I guess that's what's behind the amendment. And Chairman Pelowski, I believe you. This is more than just providing cover for those who don't want to vote for your bill. Ultimately, this is a real attempt, and just leave it at that because I'll speak a little bit more in terms of the amendment. This is just the amendment to the amendment. Give some opportunity for them to be a little bit more focused on where they get their 6% from. But members, I'd just ask that you'd vote green.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the amendment. Clerk will close the roll. There being 56 ayes and 74 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. To Representative Benson's amendment. Representative Benson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And to the amendment, members, and Mr. Speaker, I'd like a roll call on the amendment. To Chairman Pelowski again.
Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, I want to thank Chairman Pelowski for the work that he's done. It's this amendment, again, that requires some additional oversight in order for them to get their money their second year. Would have liked to had the amendment to the amendment on, but this still gets to the heart of what I'm trying to do. As we finished our work with testimony a couple of years ago, I think most of you are mindful of the first time it made it to the paper about the University of Minnesota and then President Brunick's new job. As he was retiring, we found out that he was actually not totally retiring. He was coming back into the University of Minnesota with a nice cush job, $450,000 a year, bringing back about 3 of his staff, so the hit to the university budget was about $1 million. This is all, folks, about the same time that I'm adding to the testimony the fact that there's a 15-year study showing a direct correlation between administrative overhead and tuition increases. And of course, you all know the proverbial hit in the fan in the last 6 months or 9 months with the Wall Street Journal article singling out the University of Minnesota is one of the worst. I'm sure that you get it, that we all get it, that they don't get it, that they seem somehow above making sure that what they do is the best product that they can provide. If they have a business school, what they don't do is follow what they're teaching. Where in private enterprise, we've had to streamline and cut layers and do the kinds of things that takes out expense. They've had the public dole and the public trust that, yeah, we want a great educated workforce. We need higher education, and they have abused that, folks. I'll come down off the high horse. I just would like for you to consider this and to vote green.
Representative Pelowski.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Benson and members, I'm going to repeat the same arguments. This has to work. I'm extremely sympathetic, but it has to work. Doing it on the House floor, I don't really think it works. So, Representative Benson, today I'm voting no. I hope when we come back here next year and we have accountability and oversight language that works, that you will be with us and we will incorporate versions of this into the bill next year. So members, today, please vote no.
Seeing no further discussion on the amendment, the clerk will take the roll. Clerk will close the roll. There being 59 ayes and 70 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Swazinski moving to amend Senate File 1236, the unofficial engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A12.
Representative Swedzinski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, the A12 amendment simply works to focus MnSCU and the University of Minnesota's efforts to become more agile and responsive to employment outcomes in course offerings within the state, and also on 4-year completion rates for fresh graduates coming out of our institutions. The amendment focuses on some data sets that look at from 2011, using that as base numbers, looking to increase the six-month employment rate, so after students are graduating with their degree, looking at what their unemployment rate moving forward is and trying to improve that. We're asking the institutions to submit a report that will be given to the chair and the minority leader for consideration, with ultimate decision being laid with them to make a forwarding recommendation to continue to not withhold some future increases in their funding. That's essentially the amendment, and I would ask for a roll call. Thank you.
Roll call being requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Pelowski.
Mr. Speaker and Representative Swedzinski, again, the same arguments I had with Representative Benson. This one is a little more complicated. You're on the committee, so you will be there when we have committee meetings over the interim. And I would hope that we will not only see the amendment today as an amendment on the floor with a roll call vote, but you'll bring it forward when we have hearings on legislative oversight and accountability. This has to work, members. It doesn't do us much good to take votes on the House floor and having an amendment that doesn't do what we want it to do. I'm very sympathetic, but members today vote no.
Representative Swedzinski.
Mr. Speaker, members, I just want to thank Representative Pelowski. Really, I feel like he's made a strong commitment in really analyzing what's going on in our institutions. I really believe, and I look forward to working this summer, looking forward to next fall, and really trying to come up with some good product when it comes to our accountability to students, our accountability to employers within the state. And thank you.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the amendment. The clerk will close the roll. There being 59 ayes and 71 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There are no further amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File 1236 as amended.
Third reading. Representative Nornis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I just wanted to add a couple of words as we get set to vote on the higher education bill. First, I want to thank the chair, Representative Pelowski, who did a good job. He runs a very tight committee. We started precisely on time, ended precisely on time, and those who were testifying had only so much time. I appreciate that. I made a living watching the clock. So that was positive, and I think that we also put both of the systems on notice. That was probably long overdue. I can remember the previous years listening to testimony saying, for example, the university was at the brink or the tipping point. And I guess we didn't dig deep enough to actually know that wasn't totally true. So the good news is that we have $150 million now being spent on higher education. That'll benefit students. That's what it's all about. We're not there to benefit the professors or the presidents or anyone else. The bad news is that it had to come from Health and Human Services, where not a lot of the members on my side over here are troubled by that. So $150 million less in Health and Human Services, $150 million more in higher education. All in all, this is a pretty simple little bill with only the two systems being funded and the grant program being funded, and not much more. So I guess the work was done. It's not over completely, and I do appreciate the indication of more hearings to come even between this session and next. We'll stand by and be a part of that. So members, at this point we have a bill that I think is not probably, I don't know if everyone, we talk about peace in the valley. I'm not sure. There's sort of peace in the valley, but everyone understands that this is a pretty good bill. So again, thank you very much.
Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Pelowski yield to a couple of questions?
He will yield. Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Pelowski, you know I have great respect for you and wish someday I could serve on your higher ed committee, but right now that's not possible. So I have a couple of questions, and I probably should know the answers, but you know I have not tracked the funding for higher ed for a long time. So could you explain to us the intervention for college attendance program grants? I'm reading the descriptor, and I'm wondering if I'm guessing correctly, but could you tell us what those grants have to do with college attendance?
Representative Pelowski.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Erickson, there's no change in anything in this bill other than to the MnSCU and University of Minnesota with tuition, and to the grant program, the independent student, and then the addition of the money for the MnDrive in research. Otherwise, everything is the same as it has always been.
Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Pelowski. I guess I wasn't concerned so much about the appropriation as an explanation of what college attendance program grants consist of. I mean, why are they something that we fund? Is it because students don't attend classes, or, I'm just ignorant on this and I need to be educated.
Representative Pelowski will yield. Representative Pelowski.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Erickson, what I'm going to do is answer that question when we're done with the bill right now, because I don't think I can give you a specific answer to that at this time.
Representative Erickson.
And thank you, Mr. Speaker. And would Representative Pelowski yield for one more question?
He will yield. Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Pelowski, one of my concerns, aside from the funding, has to do with programming at our MnSCU universities and the University of Minnesota. So did you have any discussions in committee, let's say, in regard to the teacher education programs and what perhaps we could be doing differently in that area of our MnSCU and university systems?
Representative Pelowski.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Erickson, that's an ongoing issue with higher education in K-12. Representative Marquardt and Representative Mariani and I are in discussion of what we're going to do over that over the interim. We do have plans at a number of the universities, Winona State being one, on totally redesigning teacher education, so that when a student comes into teacher education, the minute they walk into the door, they will be dealing with students from private and public schools. They will be doing with multiple school districts, and it will not be someone lecturing them in a classroom. You're going to see that in the bonding requests if the bonding bill comes to the floor this year, and you're also going to see it in programmatic requests in coming sessions. But that is going to change. It's something you and I have both worked on, and it's not going to be the way it was.
Representative Winkler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Pelowski, your committee this session was the strangest committee I've ever served on at the legislature. For the chair who dislikes overview hearings, we had a session of only overview hearings. We heard one bill, or two bills. We voted on one bill. It was yours, the higher ed bill. And when it was passed, there were no audible no votes on this bill in the room. I think there were some misgivings in some quarters, but there were no negative voices on it. So congratulations on creating a new experience for those of us who had the pleasure of serving on your committee this year. We actually learned a lot, members, and one of the things that we learned, that I learned, is that while this is a good budget target for higher education, $150 million is important, and a 2-year tuition freeze at MnSCU and the U of M is important and will help hundreds of thousands of Minnesota students and their families, we are not changing fundamentally the direction of higher education or higher education funding in Minnesota unless we maintain our commitment to students, tuition, and debt. The institutions can be faulted, I think, for the amount of administrative salaries, the levels of tuition increases, the amount of student debt. I think they have lived in a higher education bubble that has largely insulated them from the realities of the economy and the financial realities of a lot of their students. But we also have a significant share of responsibility for the record levels of debt and the record levels of tuition increases. It has been the Minnesota legislature that has dramatically defunded higher education. in the last several budgets, of course, but frankly since the early 1980s. We have shifted from a model in which we believed that higher education was a public good that the public should invest in and that benefited everybody, to a model in which the beneficiaries of higher education are just those students who get a degree, and we should shift more of the cost to those students, whether in the form of tuition or debt, once we've reached the point where tuition is no longer affordable. That has been a policy choice that we have made over decades. And my hope is that this higher education bill is a change in direction that is sustained over the long term. That we as legislators do, as Representative Pelowski has said, look at tuition increases as another form of rising taxes. Because that's what it is. It is a toll booth to the middle class for very many students and their families. And the more expensive that toll booth gets, the fewer kids are going to be able to get through it. So we have a responsibility for that. And I hope that if we have that commitment to seeing tuition as another form of taxation, that we will have a recognition that all of us have a responsibility to keep the price of that toll booth as low as we possibly can, and to recognize that raising revenue, if necessary, from the economy as a whole in order to fund higher education is an investment both in those students, but it's an investment in our entire workforce. We should not expect that students are going to take on the debt to become productive workers and to provide a benefit for all of us without us stepping in to help them. That is not sustainable. And this is going to really come down to all of us in the years ahead and those who come after us to make a commitment to higher education as a public good, not just at four-year degree institutions like the University of Minnesota, not just at four-year MNSCU institutions, but technical education, associate degrees, certificates, career training. All of those things are vitally important to our economic future, and it is not fair and it is not reasonable to expect all of the burden of that expense to fall on the students. That is our public policy dilemma. And the choice with the $150 million increased target that we had this year was whether to continue to feed the existing system or whether to put that money into students. And I just want to first thank the Speaker for recognizing that we need a higher target to reverse the direction of investment in higher education, but also the Chair for recognizing that it is time to send a strong message to the institutions themselves that if the public is putting more dollars into their operations, the public is putting more money into higher education, the students are the ones that should benefit. And as taxpayers and as representatives of the taxpayers, we have the authority and we have the right to decide what we want to buy in higher education. It is time that we start buying a lower cost of entrance into the middle class, a lower cost of entrance to prosperity for Minnesota students across all walks of life. Representative Marquardt's bill on education is going to do a lot. We can have 100% graduation rates. We can do wonderful things for early childhood education, for literacy, and all of those things. But at the end of the day, if it costs $30,000 in debt to get out of a four-year public institution in Minnesota, and we expect everyone to do that, we are hurting the middle class by charging them too much. We're deferring home ownership. We are deferring consumer purchases. We're putting a lot more pressure on families who are trying to get off the ground in their early years. We are doing a tremendous disservice if we believe that education stops at 12th grade and that we don't have a fundamental commitment to higher education after that point. So I hope that we can all agree that as policymakers and as representatives of the public, that when we decide to put more money into higher education, we are deciding that affordability is one of the most important priorities that we have. And the other part of that, and I hope at the end of this that we have not spent so much time criticizing MNSCU and the U of M, that they are not willing to come as partners with us and recognize that they are public servants too, and their mission has to be the same as ours, to provide higher education to the most number of people in the most relevant fields of study, the best possible quality, and to do all of that at the lowest possible price. And if they are not on that same game plan as us, this also will not work. So while I applaud the direction that we are heading in, and it's easy to criticize high administrative salaries, high administrative expenses, we should criticize it. We should not use that as an excuse to bash the institutions and not recognize that we play an equal role in making sure that we're delivering a higher education system that will work for Minnesota's future. So members, I would ask for a green vote, but more than that, I would ask for your commitment to continuing down this path that we have started this year to invest in higher education and invest in making it affordable and high quality and relevant for students as they enter the workforce.
Representative Gruenhagen.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Yeah, I had the privilege of being able to serve on the Higher Ed Committee with Chair Pelowski and the other members. And it was my first year on that committee, and I learned a lot from you, Chair Pelowski. Not to repeat what has already been said, but I find it interesting that Representative Winkler and I are approaching a similar view of the situation. We have a lot to thank for the University of Minnesota and MnSCU and the tremendous higher educational system that we have in this state and the opportunities it presents our children and the tremendous benefits it's given us economically for farming, for the technological advances, and we definitely need a strong higher ed program. However, with that, I do share many of the same concerns with that the chair mentioned and also have been mentioned by other members. I'd just like to add a couple additional factors to that to help people understand the depth of the problem that we need to bring accountability to the system. You know, one of the statistics I ran across is that higher ed costs in this state and nation are rising faster than healthcare costs and then the price of energy. So I think that puts things into proper perspective. It has just grown at a rate that is very difficult. Most of you are aware of the Wall Street Journal article, but I hope you also read former Governor Arne Carlson's piece in the Minneapolis Tribune. And we all know that Governor Carlson was a great supporter of the University of Minnesota, and I believe his picture as a governor is painted with a sweater with the University of Minnesota on it. I've had my differences with Governor Carlson over the years. I'm not a strong supporter of him, but I do appreciate the article he put out because he sees the similar problems that we addressed in the committee. For members to understand from his article, when Governor Carlson was the governor, his salary was $112,000 a year back in 1991. And the University of Minnesota president was $152,000 a year. Today, the governor's salary is $120,000 a year, or $8,000 more, but the University of Minnesota president is $610,000, members. So while the governor's gone up just a small percent, the university has gone up a president exponentially. Now that's fine, okay, if that's what the market demands. But when we provide hundreds of millions of dollars of funding to the university, it brings me to that principle that wherever government money shows up, the price of everything goes up. Because everybody sits around and tries to figure out how to get that money in their pocket. And that's what we're talking about here, members. And I not only respect Chair Pelowski, I also have developed a certain level of admiration for his attempts to bring accountability to the University of Minnesota. So I've worked with other chairs here in this House floor, and I respect them, but I haven't given out my admiration, okay? And the reason for that is it doesn't seem they want to make true reforms in the operation of government. And I'll just give a couple examples. Chair Horstein, I voted against your transportation bill. And you came over and kind of were wondering why people had voted against it. And my response was, because there's no true reform like reforming the prevailing wage. We should bring that prevailing wage down to at least the federal level and allow the market to decide what the salaries are. So again, we're just piling more money onto the current system without true reform. In education, I have a lot of respect for Chair Marquardt. But when I look at the bill, we're simply piling more money on, and we're believing that bureaucracy, expanding the Minnesota Department of Education, is going to bring accountability to the classroom. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you're going to have to send me to a re-education camp, because I cannot believe that government bureaucracy is going to produce higher academic results in the K-12 bill. And again, I voted against the tax bill. And when I see that we're reducing the benefit to people, to the good citizens of Minnesota who are generous and give to charities by 40, so the government can spend $43 million more, I guess it's really disappointing to me, because those charities, many of the people do things without being paid, just out of the goodness of their heart. And I've been a part of those charities, and I've done that work. With government, when we return $43 million to the government, everybody's got to get paid, everybody wants a raise every year, and everybody wants to retire early. I understand that, but it's a very inefficient, expensive way to meet the needs of the people of the state of Minnesota. We shouldn't be shorting our charities by reducing the benefit for people to contribute to them in the tax bill. So those are examples of where I have respect for chairs, but I have not given them admiration. Now, just as a caveat, would I prefer a Republican chair for higher ed? Well, yes, I would. But I am a realist, okay? And I will work with the other side of the aisle when I see chairmen who really want to get a handle on the exponentially growing cost in a way that benefits all students. And we should all be thankful for that, regardless of whether they're Democrat, Independent, Republican, or where we come from. So Chairman Pelowski, and once in a while when I mention your name I say Pelosi, and if I ever do, please correct me, because you know, she's the opposite of you. She said we got to pass the health care bill to find out what's in the health care bill. She should have said I was clueless besides. You're not clueless. You understand what needs to be done to bring accountability to the higher ed situation, and I sincerely appreciate that. The other thing I'd just like to say is people need to understand the gravity of the situation that we're facing. You know, and why I so strongly support these types of reforms. You know, in addition to the financial problems we're facing just in the general fund, we also have almost a $16 billion shortfall in our public pension plans, and at an unrealistic rate of an 8% return. That we're not going to tax and spend our way out of that. In fact, if we look at our K-12 system, we have other post-employment benefits that are unfunded for our K-12 system. And local school districts are borrowing money and bonding to meet those obligations. The total amount of money that local school districts are bonding to meet these other post-employment benefits, and I got this from a researcher, $700 million of obligations, members. So our local school districts are borrowing the money to pay those pension retirement benefits because they don't have the funds. No amount of taxing and spending is going to get us out of that situation. We've got to reform the system, okay? And Chair Pelowski, you've set an excellent example for all members on both sides of the aisle on what needs to be done to start getting government spending under control and their excesses. With that, members, I plan on supporting this bill. When I see somebody wanting real reform in government spending, I'm willing to compromise. And I thank you for your leadership, and thank you, members and Mr. Speaker.
Representative Hertas to the higher education bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Chair Pelowski yield for a question, please?
He will. Representative Hertas.
Chair Pelowski, I first became aware of this issue and some of the coverage that was covered by you during the beginning of session and some of the newspaper articles. And it caused me to start to think a little bit about my own experience at the University of Minnesota. And by gosh, it's already been 40 years since I was at the University of Minnesota. And but I do recall having to pay for my own college education and having to work to put myself through school. And I very clearly remember back in the early 70s that a quarter credit of college tuition at the University of Minnesota was $12.50 per quarter credit. And if I adjust for inflation based on where we are today, that would be 7.5 times, let's just call it 8, which is $100 per quarter credit. And typically back then, 12 to 14 hours was considered a quarterly tuition. So I would presume that if things just kept pace with inflation, it would be about $1,500 a quarter credit. Do you know what the cost of a quarter credit is today at the University of Minnesota?
Representative Pelowski.
Mr. Speaker, I'm going to have to research it because off the top of my head, I would not.
Representative Hertas.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple of Saturdays ago, we held some town hall meetings in our district, and I guess I would rise to express the deep concern that one young lady literally was brought to tears pleading for us to do something about the cost of higher education. And she pointed out that she's going to be graduating, and she's going to have about $50,000 of higher education debt through student loan program. And she's very worried about her ability to pay this off. And I think we need to think about what is happening to our young generation that is graduating from college. This is a real threat to our economy as well, because these young people, as they graduate from college and marry, there's household formation, and they have little or no ability to go out and buy a home because they're burdened with all of this debt. $50,000 of additional debt takes away from their qualifying ratios to buy a home or to do other things in our economy which stimulate our economy and generates tax revenues. So I really appreciate the effort that's trying to be done here. If the chair would yield for one more question, please.
He will yield. Representative Hertas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Chair Pelowski, in this proposal, there's additional new spending for the university, and I was just wondering why we're just freezing tuition and not using those funds to actually reduce the tuition for the new college students.
Representative Pelowski.
Mr. Speaker, there are a couple of answers to that. The first answer to your tuition question is it depends on the program you're in. So if you pick a particular program, that would be the tuition. But to your current question, the University of Minnesota, when it gave its budget request, said it would hold tuition flat at 3%. If we funded it, would not increase it. So we held them to that. I asked President Kaler point blank what his priorities were. Were your priorities new spending or tuition? He said if your target or if you only have so much money, then tuition. Tuition has to start being held flat, or if we even add more, going down. Secondly, your question on the new spending. The new spending goes to their research. And the University of Minnesota is the only research institution in this state. It is the premier research institution. Where the new money goes, and remember this is 50% of what they asked, so this is not all of it. It goes to robotics, sensors, advanced manufacturing. It goes to global food supply, and I think we all know the impact that the University of Minnesota has had on food, advancing industry, conserving our environment. Those issues have been talked about in other bills. Discoveries and treatments for brain conditions. That's where the $18 million goes for research in the University of Minnesota. So we have not funded the entire university request, but we added a caveat here, and this goes to your point on oversight. In order for the university to get the money for the tuition, the regions have to take action. They have to vote and say they are going to actually hold tuition flat at the number, and this is their number that we have in the bill. The same is true of the MnSCU system.
Representative Hertas.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Chair Pelowski, and thank you for your oversight. And I would share the concerns of Representative Benson that he's expressed, and also Representative Winkler, the comments that you've made. I think we're moving in the right direction. I just hope that we could do even more than we're doing.
Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, Representative Pelowski, thank you for bringing this bill forward. Thank you for your work on the bill and in the committee and the direction that you are bringing to higher education in Minnesota. I think this is exactly the direction we need to go. Unfortunately, I won't be voting for the bill. Your bill is wonderful in its design, but the target is too high. It's an issue with the target. Also want to thank you, Representative Pelowski, for taking the amendment earlier. It will take another $500,000 from the allocation or the appropriation and get it in the hands of students, and hopefully we can bring that back from conference committee through those negotiations. You know, the approach, and I was listening to Representative Winkler talk, and he talked about a toll booth, and as I think about this bill represents, at least as far as I can see, a changing in the guard at the toll booth. What we have now is we have the institutions, we have the bureaucracy in the toll booth. And Representative Pelowski and his approach is going to bring the people to be the guard in the toll booth rather than the bureaucracy. And members, this approach, I think, can serve as an example for each of the budget areas that we have already heard and those we are yet to hear. We need to bring these types of reforms. This is an exemplary example of where we need to go in reforming state government. And so, Representative Pelowski, I thank you for that. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to vote for the bill. Two things. One is just kind of taking a look at the handout that Chair Pelowski shared with us on the administrator salaries and where they're going. Members, about 4 years ago I did an inventory of all the salaries in state government that were above $100,000 a year. At the time, there were 4,000 plus people in state government that earned $100,000 or more per year. I would expect today that same inventory would yield 5,000 or more. The bureaucracy that we're talking about here, MnSCU and the U of M, account for a large number of those, a significant number, but certainly not all. Lastly, I'd just like to offer and thank Representative Lilly for the nice little graphic he put together here. Thank you, Representative Lilly. You know, members, I think this is an indicative of what we see when we go on the campaign trail. The folks talk about, oh, you Republicans and Democrats, all you do is fight. You never get along, and of course, we know that the media is there trying to feed on the times when we don't necessarily see eye to eye on the approaches that we're taking, our approach to governing here in the state of Minnesota. But I think the reality today, in realizing there's a lot of support for the direction from the minority, for the direction that Chair Pelowski is taking in this bill, the little bit of kumbaya moment is also reflected in the fact that the majority, I don't know if it's the majority, it's a large number of bills that pass through this institution that are unanimous in their vote. And so the reality is sometimes we do disagree and sometimes there is the thrilla in Manila, Representative Lilly, but the reality is we're all focused on the same goal, and there's a large number of times when we work together in order to accomplish that. So, Representative Pelowski, thank you, and thank you, members of Mr. Speaker.
Representative Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I want to rise to voice my disagreement with the bill as it currently sits. While I appreciate Representative Pelowski, and I know he's on the right track, I don't think we're going far enough. And I'd like to explain exactly why I say what I do. Right now, according to the bill, we need $43 million in order to keep tuition flat at the University of Minnesota. I don't think we need $43 million to keep tuition flat at the University of Minnesota. I think there are other ways we can do that. And the main reason I believe that tuition is what it is, $13,000 a year for undergraduate, is because non-resident tuition is so low. The people of Minnesota are subsidizing non-resident tuition currently. The reason I say that is we're going to fund the University of Minnesota to the tune of about $550,000 per year. There's about 27,000, 30,000 U of M kids from the state of Minnesota. Taxpayers are already subsidizing resident tuition to the tune of about $13,000 to $15,000 per year. So that's what our taxpayers are doing right now for Minnesota kids. U of M tuition for in-state people is $13,000 a year. For out-state, it's about $18,000. Okay, that gap isn't large enough. We could simply keep tuition flat for in-state kids by raising tuition for out-state kids. Raising it to a level that is typical of other universities around the country and certainly in the Big Ten. I have a sheet of paper that I don't have in front of me, but it's currently being copied and passed out that explains very clearly what the Big Ten charges for tuition in every campus around the Midwest. With the one exception of Northwestern, they charge $43,000 per child regardless of where they live, probably because they probably don't get much, if any, state reimbursement from the Illinois taxpayers. Michigan State, they charge about $13,000 for in-state kids. They charge about $35,000 for out-state kids. University of Michigan, about the same. $13,000 in-state, about $35,000 or more for non-resident kids. We're not charging enough. University of Minnesota taxpayers, University of Minnesota kids who grew up, graduated from Minnesota high schools are subsidizing the cost of education for folks who are non-residents. If we change that, we wouldn't need $43 million. We could do it through policy change. That's what needs to happen. We can use that $43 million for other purposes, and I believe that's what needs to happen right now. Let's give you another thought on this. I'm a graduate of Mankato State University, proud graduate, Maverick, back in 1989. And I'm currently bringing my kids over to, I have a high school senior. We're taking a lot of college trips. And to give you a story about a non-state campus we went to, I'll mention it, Iowa State. We go there, wife and I, my daughter, look around, beautiful campus, beautiful buildings. We're in the courtyard. And the guy taking the tour says, yeah, these are the main buildings in campus. They're 120 years old. And, it's a beautiful campus, big, beautiful buildings. Said, well, what goes on in those? Well, that's where the professors, that's where their offices are. Said, well, do the kids go in there? Is there any classes in those big, beautiful buildings? No, the classes are kind of down below. And he kind of shrugged like he didn't think that was the right thing to do. That's an example of where our college education has gone. We've changed our mission from helping educate kids to the people that work there. Those people have, they've lost focus. There's no reason why the big, beautiful buildings on a campus should be owned, controlled by the professors. They're there to teach kids. Having said that, that was Iowa. That's not Minnesota. In Minnesota, along similar lines, the pay we give our professors. One professor earns more than $500,000. 5 earn between $400,000 and $500,000. 30 make more between $300,000 and $400,000. 177 professors earn between $200,000 and $300,000. That's an example of losing focus. We keep the focus on the kids, keep the focus on tuition. We can not only keep tuition flat, we can actually lower it. I agree with you, Chair Pelowski. Ran some numbers. I'm an analyst. I ran some numbers. If we change our tuition, in-state tuition, we could drop it to $10,000 while charging non-resident people about $29,000 a year, which is appropriate given what other Big Ten schools are charging. We could actually drop tuition without $43 million in extra money. That's the right answer. Our money is limited. Our taxpayers' money, their ability to fund government is limited. We need to do the right thing, and I'll be voting red on the bill. Thank you.
Representative Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, as you know, I'm very passionate about veterans, taking care of veterans, and that's what I'm going to stand up and talk about today. You know, during session, I became aware of a veteran that applied for a graduate degree, a PhD degree. He wanted to go to the University of Minnesota for a PhD. This veteran was still in Afghanistan at the time he made his application. He wanted to start last fall. This isn't your average veteran. He was awarded a Bronze Star for his service in Afghanistan. He's got a master's degree. He scored in the testing over the 95 percentile. And he was denied admittance into the graduate degree, into the program. To me, that's not right. So I wrote a bill, submitted a bill, authored a bill to provide veterans preference for those applying to graduate degrees. Didn't get a hearing, not in the bill. And I say that not just because that's not in the bill, but we need to make our universities veteran friendly. If you want to look it up, you can go to the Best for Vets, colleges that are best for vets. There's 68 colleges and universities listed on there. South Dakota has 3 listed. Wisconsin has 2 listed. I'm getting to my point. How many do you think are based in Minnesota? Not one. Not one. So I appeal to you. I think we can do better. We need to draw those veterans into our state. We need to take care of them. And I don't think we're getting it done. Thank you. And I'll say one thing. If we had the availability, and it's my fault I didn't get to take that bill and make an amendment. I didn't get it in soon enough. But if we didn't have the 24-hour rule, it'd be here today. But I apologize for that. It's my fault. I didn't get it done. Thank you.
Representative Loon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Mr. Speaker, I wondered if Representative Pelowski would yield to a question. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Pelowski. Well, you know, Representative Pelowski, I'm honestly kind of conflicted about what to do on this vote because I think the other members have done a good job too of lauding your hard work. And I know when you came before the Ways and Means Committee, I was very impressed with. I think what you're taking is a pretty tough line on the U and insisting some reforms. And I think we all are very pleased with your efforts on that area. But just, I wanted to share comments I've received since serving in public office from some of the parents in my district for their children who are looking to go on to higher education and wanting to go to the U, and wondered if you could let me know if this was discussed or addressed in your committee in debating this bill. And it gets a little bit to Representative Barrett's comments. I've had parents write to me as well complaining about what appears to be lower rates for out-of-state tuition compared to in-state. But, you know, I always get right around college selection time a couple of emails or phone calls or letters from parents, very impassioned. They're U of M graduates, and maybe their parents were. There's a real legacy there. And their child, who is, let's say, a 3.5 grade average out of 4, good student, honor students, took some AP classes, can't get into the University of Minnesota, is waitlisted. And it's something that causes great consternation on their part, and something that I have to wonder about a little bit as well, especially in the context of what appears to be a pretty good break for out-of-state tuition students. So I wondered if you could just tell me if that's an issue that you debated at all in committee, and if you have a perspective on that, and how the university is looking at that issue.
Representative Pelowski.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Loon, first of all, on your issue of non-resident tuition that's been raised here, President Kaler testified that that's going to change, and President Kaler his word has been good. So the regions are going to have to take action, but you're going to see a change in those tuition rates. Secondly, we did take testimony. The U has more students apply than it can possibly take. So its system, unfortunately, cannot absorb all of the students that apply. And at this point, there isn't much we can do about that. The U is a very popular place to go.
Representative Loon.
Well, thank you. I thank Representative Pelowski for his response. And again, I would imagine that is true. I know it's highly sought for a lot of Minnesota students and others, and it is Definitely a school where we have high-quality applicants, very bright students trying to get in. I'm just trying to sort of, in my own mind, balance sort of the interests of making sure that we have ample opportunities for students from Minnesota to attend. My concern also is that if students feel like their only option is to go out of state, once those bright students leave, we don't often get them back, and we want them staying here. Also, I'm kind of weighing, I feel like the U has a lot of missions, and obviously as a research university they are essential to our economy and the things that go on there, but we've also got the purpose of the undergraduate school, and I see that as something quite different. So I want to thank Representative Pelowski for his work and his comments, and I'll continue to listen to debate. Thank you.
Representative Earhart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Pelowski, Chairman Pelowski, yield?
He will. Representative Earhart.
I'm wondering if in your committee hearings, did anything ever come up, or did you ever investigate the oversight of the regents to that institution at the University of Minnesota? I have a feeling that having spent some time over there before Kaler arrived, that the regents were a mixed bag of people some were very interested in what was happening, and the others were rubber stamping staff-directed initiatives. And I don't think that they were performing their duties as a body to oversee. I see them as oversight for the university and a board of directors, and maybe that's not the case. Can you shed any light on my query?
Representative Pelowski.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Erdahl, you may have missed my comments characterizing the regents as a House of Lords where you get a title, a robe, and a very nice place to meet, and apparently you really don't have to take action on anything. You will note that in this bill, the regents have to take action before the Office of Management and Budget will release the money on tuition. We will be, in the hearings that we're going to have in the interim, looking at the election of the regents, and that undoubtedly will take up a good amount of time. But I agree with you. Not one regent over the period of time of historic cuts to the University of Minnesota, cuts that were greater than any university of its type in this country, complained. The regents have taken inaction on a number of things. We will continue to press them, and I hope that when they hear the characterization of them as a House of Lords, that they will come to the committee and change that.
Representative Earhart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Pelowski. Those are choice words.
Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. What a difference 2 years makes. 2 years ago, under the now minority, the Minnesota legislature enacted what I believe are the deepest cuts in the state's history in higher education. And as a result, we know that Minnesota students and their families are struggling with the cost of tuition, and we've saddled our young people with a lot of debt. I know from personal experience with 2 kids in college in a public university what that's like. Representative Pelowski's bill invests in students, but it also makes higher ed more affordable for students, for families, and it's bringing really important accountability to our universities, important oversight to our universities. And I think that's something that we all share as a priority and should be thanking Representative Pelowski and the members of the Higher Education Committee, Democrats and Republicans together, for insisting upon that as we work on this bill today. This week we are making historic investments in education, in early education, in K-12 education, and in higher education. And we've talked about this session often as the education session. And we're really proud of the work that we're doing. We believe it reflects Minnesotans' priorities, and we believe it is the path to a more prosperous future and a stronger middle class for Minnesotans. And I'm delighted that we're taking up this bill as the last of the installments of our education session and the work of this week. I think it's important to note, as we worked our way through this week, that we have paid for our plan in education. We put together a budget that is absent of gimmicks and it's absent of borrowing. And yesterday we voted on Representative Lincheski's bill that pays for these investments. Representative Pelowski's bill is a strong bill for Minnesota, and I hope and anticipate, and I've heard that there are Republicans that are planning to vote for it, as you did on the E12 bill, which is great. But I do think it's important to note that voting for the investments in education and not for the revenue is a little like eating the pie before the pot roast. It's important for us to pay for the things that we invest in. And that's our plan. That's our commitment to Minnesotans. We believe that reflects honest budgeting without gimmicks. So I urge green votes today, but also remember, if we want these investments, we have to pay for them, to be honest with Minnesotans. Please vote green. Thank you.
Representative Pelowski.
Members, today, you're voting on a bill that for the first time in decades, we are actually going to say we're not going to increase tuition. We're going to tackle a problem that will take us probably years to solve, because it took years to create. Tuition and debt are the two biggest fundamental problems in higher education. So when you vote today, if you vote green, there will be no tuition increase for undergraduates at the University of Minnesota and the MnSCU system, which also means they won't have to borrow more. So we will be also addressing the historic debt. This bill spends money on students. The only other spending is in the grant program, which is on students. And it is just a fraction of what the university wanted for research, our only research institution. It's rare when you get to take a vote that goes almost totally to students. But that's the vote you're going to take today for students, for low tuition, for ending the cycle of debt. Vote green today.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. The clerk will close the roll. There being 86 ayes and 44 noes, the bill is passed as amended and its title agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for the day is Senate File 745. The clerk will report the bill.
Senate File 745 on the calendar for the day, the second engrossment, an act relating to state government.
Representative Simon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This is the annual Omnibus Data Practices Bill. And for those who aren't familiar with the Data Practices Act or who once were and need a refresher course, that is Chapter 13 of Minnesota statutes. And basically, it's like the federal Freedom of Information Act. It's our version in Minnesota, and it governs what government can do and not do with various data and other information. It's about 150 pages of statute, and it starts with the presumption that the stuff that government gets is public unless. And that 150 pages or so is the unless part. there are exclusions and exceptions and exceptions to exclusions and exclusions to exceptions, and that's why it's about 150 pages of law. But it's important stuff, and we have members here in this institution who care a lot about it. I want to thank, before I get into the bill, Charlotte Anton of the House Civil Law Committee, the kind of umbrella committee of the Civil Law, or of the Data Practices Subcommittee, Kate Weeks of DFL Research, John Hultquist from the Republican Caucus, and Matt Gehring from House Research for helping to put this together, and of course the members who served on the subcommittee. I want to thank, first of all, Representative Lesch, the chair of the overall Civil Law Committee, who was very involved, Representative Holberg, Scott, Winkler, and Hortman, who joined me in crafting this bill. It really is an omnibus bill in the true sense. It's about 14 people's bills kind of put together in this bill, all covering Chapter 13 data issues. So I'll be real quick. I'm sure your bill briefs are excellent. So I'll go through and just very quickly talk about what's in it. Section 1 is Representative Freiberg's bill, having to do with what municipalities can do with information from citizens who request to be on various listservs, that sort of thing. Representative Schoen had a bill that comprises Section 2 that has to do with data that we get from community crime prevention programs. There are several sections from Representatives Kahn and Holberg having to do with the Department of Public Health and what they can and can't do with certain data, particularly biological data. We've got public employee settlement information. I really applaud Representative Myra, who, as many of you know, for the last couple of years has worked on this issue. She came up with, I think, a great bill last session and has really perfected it and improved it this session, and she worked it out with stakeholders, so I applaud her there. We've got stuff in there from Representative Winkler on data having to do with individuals with disabilities. Representative Earhart has some provisions, 3 sections in fact, on data classification and use with respect to transit and the Minnesota Department of Transportation. I think there will be some amendments to that effect today. And then mileage-based user fee data. We've got construction and contractor data from Representative Earhart. Newborn hearing screening from Representative Dorton, who I know has worked long and hard on these issues and came up with what I think is a sensible bill that will really impact a lot of kids in this state. We've got stuff on permitting medical examiners and coroners to use certain data. That comes from Representative Hilstrom. And then Representative Scott has a section in here on granting access to employment data for case planning purposes. There's several sections in here from Representative Lesch, who has worked with the Department of Public Safety to streamline the ability of Department of Public Safety to share certain data with folks from other states and with other portions of our state. Representative Schoen, again, has something on domestic fatality review team access, or team data access. That's basically it, members. We have several amendments here today. I think this is a group that worked well together, the Civil Law Group. We had some Civil Law Committee. We had some good discussion as well on the subcommittee's work. As I say, it's kind of a diffuse and diverse group of statutes that are combined in this bill, but they all have one thing in common, and that's Chapter 13, the Data Practices Act. I think we're ready to go to amendments, or I'll entertain any questions. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Representative Simon, did you want to substitute the House language for the Senate language?
Yes, Madam Speaker, I'd like to substitute the House language by amendment if I could.
There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Simon moves to amend Senate File 745, the second engrossment as follows. Delete everything after the enacting clause and insert the language of House File 695, the first engrossment. The amendment is coded DEA 695.
Representative Simon.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. This just substitutes the House language, which is the latest engrossment of House File 695.
All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Scott moving to amend Senate File 745, the second engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A1.
The member from Anoka, Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This amendment adds clarifying language that attempts to maintain Minnesota's data classifications when sharing or exchanging data with other states, countries, or our federal government in their treatment of our criminal justice information. And members, we want to make sure that, one of the things that makes Minnesota great with within our statutes is Chapter 13. It is nation-leading statute and law. And we want to make sure that if we are exporting information to other government entities, outside of Minnesota, we want to make sure that that information maintains the high standard of protection that we have here in the state of Minnesota. And I know that Representative Lesch may have some issues with this amendment, and if Representative Lesch would yield to a question.
He will. Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Lesch, if you just want to maybe get on the record and tell us what your opposition is to this amendment, that'd be great.
Representative Lesch.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members. First, with respect to the amendment, I understand the effort that you're trying to do, Representative Scott, and it is a noble effort and the direction in which we need to move. That said, as the amendment is drafted, it's problematic because most Minnesota agencies are on the secure network governed by Chapter 13 in order to, and with respect to this section, it would implicate problems in the areas of e-charging, the direction we're moving in the courts. As you're aware, the judicial branch, the courts, are not subject to Chapter 13, so it would cause problems with the courts participating in those programs. There are other issues affecting tribal agencies on the secure network. So I guess what I would say, Representative Scott, is those are the problems that I have with the amendment as drafted. However, knowing full well that this is the direction you want to move, I'm open to that and would ask if you did withdraw the amendment that I would work with you moving forward next session on this.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I am agreeable to that. I will withdraw the amendment, and hopefully we can work on this and make it so it does what it can to protect the data leaving our state. Thank you. And I encourage a green vote on the amendment, please. Thanks.
Representative Scott, did you want to withdraw your amendment?
Sorry, yes, withdraw the amendment. Sorry.
Representative Scott withdraws her amendment. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Scott moving to amend Senate File 745 as amended as follows. The amendment is coded A2.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This amendment adds language requiring inventory of biological specimens, registries, and health data and databases collected and maintained by the Health Department, and it requires the Health Commissioner to provide the schedules for storage and requires the inventory and schedules to be posted on the Health Department's website and requires the inventory and schedules to be submitted to the legislature. And I would encourage a green vote on this amendment. One of the results of the court cases last year regarding the baby DNA was that the Department of Health needed to make public how long they were going to be storing data of any kind, any biological data. So this amendment actually is borrowed from the Senate language, and it just does talk about having a schedule for destroying the data and those sorts of things. So I hope I can have a green vote on this. Thank you.
Representative Simon.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thanks for the amendment, Representative Scott. I'd like to defer to Representative Kahn, who has talked with some folks at the Department of Health. I think she mostly views it positively. So, Madam Speaker, I would encourage the Speaker to call on Representative Kahn.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Kahn.
Madam Speaker and members, this amendment is acceptable. I've talked with the people at the Department of Health. This is essentially what they're doing, and it just kind of categorizes what they're doing. The only thing I was a little dubious about was the submitting the inventory and schedules to the chairs and ranking minority members of the committees of the legislature. I would hope that chairs and ranking minority members would, no matter which party is in charge, would be smart enough to look on the website themselves and see it. But I accept the amendment.
Seeing no further discussion to the amendment, all those in favor of the Scott amendment, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Holberg moving to amend Senate File 745 as amended as follows. The amendment is coded A3.
The member from Dakota, Representative Holberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker and members. I would like to withdraw this amendment.
Representative Holberg withdraws the amendment. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Holberg moving to amend Senate File 745 as amended as follows. The amendment is coded A5.
Representative Holberg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. And this amendment would delete the language that classified information for the mileage-based user fee study that was done by MnDOT. And this is an issue that's been before this body for a couple of years and unfortunately has a rather sordid past. What happened was the legislature in a transportation finance bill set aside money to do a mileage-based user fee study, but never considered any of the data privacy implications of a study. And so what happened is prior to moving forward with the study, MnDOT went forward with the study without getting the proper classifications in place for this very sensitive data that was being collected on individuals who would participate in the study. What they did instead is they went to the Department of Administration for a temporary classification. They got this temporary classification for a limited set of data, which will expire in August of this year. So I know that Representative Earhart, in bringing forth this bill, wants to protect the private information of individuals that participated in that study. Unfortunately, the language that we have before us in this bill is one of the examples of why people get frustrated with Chapter 13 and why it seems confusing. The language in this bill really doesn't even follow many of the basic precepts of how you make changes in Chapter 13 and classify data, and will probably result in more confusion than what it solves. And so with that, I'm hoping that the chair or the author of this language would be willing to yield for a few questions. So would Representative Earhart yield?
He will yield. Representative Holberg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Earhart, as I look at the language in your bill, I have some concerns. And if we can start on line 10, you classify the data of the participants, their contact information, and the data contained in the applications for participation. Can you tell us what other information is included in those applications?
Representative Earhart.
Madam Speaker and Representative Holberg, the temporary classification was for vehicle identification data, financial account data, road usage data, and participant names. And incidentally, my information is that they applied for this before they started the study, about 6 months, maybe 8 months before they began the study, the pilot project. They had applied for the temporary classification from the Department of Administration.
Madam
Representative
Speaker.
Holberg.
Representative Earhart, you just reiterated the items on lines 2 through 5. The information that I'm asking about at this time is the data contained in the applications. Because on lines 10 and 11 of page 6, you say participants, their contact information, and all the data contained in the applications for participation. So can you tell me what additional data sets that they collected on those applications, which will now be classified as non-public or private?
Representative Earhart.
Madam Speaker, I don't know what she's talking about over there. The representative either is not using her microphone properly or I can't hear her, one or both. But in any event, I don't know what your citations were, and I'd please repeat them.
Representative Holberg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Earhart, can you tell the body when these people, these citizens of Minnesota, filled out an application to participate in this program, what other data sets did they give to MnDOT beyond their name, their contact information, and their vehicle information?
Representative Earhart.
Madam Speaker, I can't hear what she's saying, so have we got anybody else that can hear this, that knows what's going on with this bill? Representative Simon?
Representative Holberg, I wonder if you want to temporarily withdraw your amendment and speak with Representative Earhart, and we could move on to the next amendment. Representative Holberg.
Well, Madam Speaker, I'm trying to get some information here, and I don't know if there's additional amendments at the desk.
Representative Holberg, there's one more Scott amendment at the desk. Representative Holberg.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. If you'd like, I can temporarily lay the amendment on the table.
Why don't we do that? He can't hear you, and I can't fix that from up here, so we will lay over the Holberg amendment temporarily. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Scott moving to amend Senate File 745 as amended as follows. The amendment is coded A7.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank Representative Norton for bringing forth a good bill on newborn hearing screening. And what this language does is it clarifies the option and procedures for parents or guardians whose child or children undergo early hearing screening to contact the Department of Health to have the test results destroyed if they choose. This would require that the Minnesota Department of Health post on the website the form necessary to make such a request. And this amendment allows the Minnesota Department of Health to keep the test results until the child's 18th birthday before being destroyed. Of course, the parents in this provision would be able to opt out of that at any time by using this form. So I would just encourage a green vote. Thank you.
Representative Norton.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I guess I'm going to just suggest folks go ahead and vote green if the author of the bill is okay with that, and I think he can weigh in. I was a little surprised to not hear from the department or the advocates themselves about this, but I do know that it matches the language in the Senate and that it is acceptable to them. Just as the author of the bill, it's kind of surprising to hear on the House floor just a few hours before. Having said all that, I think we're good to go, and I'd suggest a green vote.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Kahn.
Again, Madam Speaker and members, this is part of the data privacy section from the Department of Health. And again, I've spoken with the people from the Department of Health, and this is acceptable to him. One of the points I'd like to make at this time of the option to allow parents to withdraw the data and have it destroyed prematurely for the 8-year is that's probably not a very good idea for the health of their family and the health of their child, but I think it's incumbent upon the department to develop an informed consent process that will make it clear to them, so that people who value privacy, for example, above knowing things that might be positive for the health of their child, know exactly what they're getting into if they make this request. But I have no objection to the amendment.
Seeing no further discussion to the amendment, all those in favor of the amendment, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. We'll return to the Holberg amendment. The clerk will report the amendment.
Holberg moving to amend Senate File 745 as amended as follows. The amendment is coded A5.
Thank you, Representative Holberg. Representative Holberg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Earhart, I see that you have staff there helping you. Maybe they're able to hear the questions and can provide you with the answers. But I am curious as to what other information is contained in the application that we're classifying here in your language that's in this bill.
Representative Earhart.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And what difference does it make as long as they're classifying all of it, which is what we're doing, and then we're allowing a summary report but never identifying the participants? Now, Madam Chair, I was one of the people that participated in this study, and I'd like to ask Representative Holberg if she was one that did.
Representative Earhart, Representative Holberg has control of the floor. You could ask her to yield when she's done, but you can't ask her to yield when you're yielding to her. Representative Holberg.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Earhart, I was not a participant for many reasons, but I think that many people that participated in this program would be pretty upset to know what the ramifications are about the lack of data classifications around this program and the uncertainty about what happens on August 13th. But I do have additional questions about your language. In paragraph C on lines 20 through 22, you talk about you say the notwithstanding, and then you say that this data can only be produced to federal, state, and local law enforcement authorities. In the data practices chapter, we don't usually spell it out this way. We use definitions in that chapter. And I think that by doing it this way, you would preclude the BCA and the Sentencing Guidelines Commission from having access to this, and I was wondering why you took that approach.
Representative Earhart.
Well, Madam Speaker, I have feelings that you're kind of an expert in this area from those in-depth questions you're asking and your reputation, one way or another. But besides that, Madam Chair and Representative Holberg, this is a department bill. They asked me to carry it. It went before your committee, the committees that you're on, as I remember it. I don't remember you saying anything at the time. So to question what's here, I'm only saying that I think we're trying to take care of something maybe that should have been taken care of before. But it's getting taken care of now, so let's put these people under a vow of silence that gave their information and let it go at that. We are correcting a wrong that that what you see is a wrong.
Representative Holberg.
Madam Speaker and Representative Earhart, I'm just trying to figure out what you're trying to do here. And if you have good data practice policy, you have a balance between an individual's right to privacy and sunshine on what government is doing. And so in this particular area, we should protect the privacy of the individuals, their movements in their cars, locations, etc. But we need to leave enough information available to the public to be able to have the ability to ascertain the pros and cons of mileage-based user fees and whether or not the $5 million that was appropriated for this study was used effectively. And so one thing that I've never seen before, and maybe you can help me out on this, is we give law enforcement access to this information pursuant to a valid probable cause search warrant. Is there such a thing as an invalid probable cause search warrant?
He will yield. Representative Earhart.
Madam Chair, Representative Holberg, there you go again, spinning all those words that you've learned in the data practice field at me. Your many years of astute attention to all those data practice things. And by the way, I'm wondering if we're going to have testimony from the guy with the big mustache, who seems to also to be an expert. Or has he already talked with you, Representative Holberg?
Well, Madam Speaker,
that's Newhouse. I'm sorry.
I'm not sure.
Representative Earhart, are you through? Representative Holberg has the floor if you're through answering her question.
I thought we'd get to that. I think the important objective here is that we have put this data under a cloak, or we will. It is now till August, and it's only appropriate that we continue what the Department of Administration granted on a temporary basis, and all of the participants in this would expect. I think it was explained at the time that I signed my agreement to participate in the study that there was a secrecy of the data that I was giving them, and that should be continued. I don't have anything to hide, but if they don't get it right to the snatch, that's all right with me. I gave them all the information they asked, and I expected that come the right time that the powers that be would put me under the dome of classification, and we'd be continue it, and we'd be all right. There is sunshine available here, but it depends on whose sunshine you're looking at, I suppose.
Representative Holberg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, I didn't hear any response to my question about a valid or invalid search warrant, so I'm not sure exactly what that language in this bill even is trying to accomplish. Members, there's so many problems with this section of the bill, and I think that the intent is good, but maybe we should ask ourselves, should this information even be stored by the department beyond this study? Why would we want 5 years from now, 10 years from now, the Minnesota Department of Transportation to have road use information on people that participated in this study? Might not a better approach be that we advise the department to destroy any personal identifying information? The study's over. They have their information. Under current law, they can keep summary data that doesn't identify individuals, so they'd be able to keep their summary data. But really, do we want this information sitting over in that big building across the street for unlimited periods of time? And really, do we really want law enforcement to have access? We're going to have a bill come up here in the next week or so about license plate readers, and that those track the actual where people go, what businesses, what neighborhoods they visit, etc., where locations of vehicles. Do we really want Minnesota Department of Transportation to keep this information and just classify it as private or non-public? I think we should ask ourselves. I mean, in my opinion, the reason I brought forth this amendment to delete this section of the bill is, number one, it's written very poorly. It's very confusing. I won't burden Representative Earhart with more questions. But if you look at the language on line 12, it says applications for purchase, lease, or rental of the GPS navigation device. Now, it doesn't specify that those data sets just related to the individual. I think it can be read that all the information about MnDOT, the contracts that they had around these data sets, are not available to the public. And that's wrong. We should know how much they paid for this stuff. We should be able to review the contracts that they entered into for the devices. And so this is just not well written. I understand the intent, but I would think that a much better approach would be to direct the Department of Transportation to delete all information, all data on individuals and their vehicles that could identify them and their activities, and only keep the summary data that supports the provisions of the study and the issues and questions they were trying to answer about is mileage-based user fees a viable way of raising revenue to support our transportation system, and I would ask for support on the A5 amendment.
Representative Simon.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, and Representative Holberg, I think the best accommodation here, you raised some very fair points. I think maybe the language here could be tweaked to reach a better balance between the personal identifying information, which is one thing, and the underlying contracts on other things, which is another. My fear is that in deleting the entire section, then we have no standards. So I would respectfully urge members to vote no on the amendment, but you have my word that when we go to conference committee, which we will, because there are significant differences throughout the bill with the Senate, that I will entertain your suggestions for making this tighter and making this better. Notwithstanding the ultimate program, whether people like or don't like this MnDOT initiative, I think there are some things that you brought to light today and in the committee earlier that we could do to tighten the language to reach that balance that you referred to. But members, I don't think we should totally delete the section at this point. So I would respectfully urge a no vote on the amendment only because it does completely delete the section. But Representative Holberg brings up some important issues that she has my pledge I will address and we will all address in conference.
Representative Earhart.
Madam Chair, I think that the chair of the first committee we went through knows what he's talking about, and we probably has a good idea, and we should proceed in those directions and vote this out and let them change it when they do a committee when they do the conference committee. But you know, Representative Holberg, you had every opportunity to raise all of this and show your expertise in the data practices world in committee. And so, in a way, this is kind of a lot of nonsense. But I think that if we want to get at least continue the coverage that we have that's secure on the data that MnDOT has and carry it on into a permanent status, why don't we just pass this out and get the final conclusion of the right language? And I'm sure that you'll be on any conference committee because you're the only one that knows anything about this field, and we will settle that. So I'd urge a green vote. Thank you. Or a red vote on the amendment and a green vote on the bill when we get there.
Representative Holberg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. Well, conference committee is the worst place with the fewest amount of people that has the opportunity to address this. And I think even Chair Lesch and Representative Simon would recognize the time constraints we were under with both the Data Practices Subcommittee and when we put the Omnibus bill together on deadline day in the Civil Law Committee, and there wasn't a lot of time for discussion on these bills. And I don't know that this is nonsense, Representative Earhart. These are important issues. My preference is I would appreciate support for my amendment. Representative Earhart's bill is a standalone bill, has been moved to the floor. It could be brought up at a subsequent date. We could have a discussion on the policy on his bill as an individual bill and have more than 5 or 6 people weigh in on this important subject. So, members, I would ask for your support on this amendment.
Discussion. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the amendment, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, please say no. No. The motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There are no further amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File 745 as amended.
Third reading. Discussion. Representative Simon.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. As you heard today, notwithstanding some disagreement on some language, this is a bill with a lot of widespread support, and it really does some good things to reach that balance which we've discussed today between public entities being able to do their job and the public, our constituents, being able to have access to that information. So I urge a yes vote on the overall bill.
The member from Dakota, Representative Myra.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. Representative Simon, I want to thank you for including my bill in your omnibus bill. It's Section 4, Public Data. Members, this came from a situation in my House district a year ago where an individual from a school got paid over $250,000, and after a lot of work on it with stakeholders, it passed unanimously here and was signed by the governor. In the interim, however, there were a number of issues that came up, and so the bill that I have authored this session attempts to address those. There are quite a few organizations that support this bill. The Association of Minnesota Counties, League of Minnesota Cities, Minnesota School Board Association, Minnesota Elementary School Principal Association, Minnesota Association of Secondary School Principals, Minnesota Association of School Administrators, the Metro Inter-County Association, and the Minnesota Newspaper Association, including taxpayers, parents, and advocacies for transparency. The bill passed, and the language that went through committee in the House, of course, is in the House file. However, afterward, it went through the Senate, and they added a provision requested by the teachers union. And I just wanted to note here on the floor that I'm in favor of those added words, and I have spoken to Representative Simon, and he has assured me that this will be dealt with in conference committee, but I did want to bring it to your attention. There is added language to identify athletic directors, and we've modified that rather than it just be any athletic director, because there are many individuals who maybe are an athletic director for just a very small part of their job, and they're a teacher. And so we modified the title of athletic director by those whose duties include at least 50% of their time spent in administration, personnel, supervision, and evaluation. This is language that's in the Senate, and I am in favor of it, and I appreciate your support for my bill. Thank you.
The member from Washington, Representative Lomer.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'm wondering if Representative Simon would yield to a question, please.
He will. Representative Lomer.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Simon, I'm looking at how the genetic information on our citizens could be used. And the language on line 1033 says, consent of an individual is not required under this subdivision. Can you explain why the government is being given permission to bank our DNA and data without our consent?
Representative Simon.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Lomer, as I'm sure you know, because I think you've been involved in some of these debates, there's a long-standing push and pull here going on with the Department of Health. I do think that this bill has really reached mostly an accommodation, as you've heard from Representative Kahn and others in the Department of Health. So it's not so simple to answer that question. It's a fair question, but the banking, as you call it, that appears in this bill is really the culmination of a lot of efforts over a lot of years to reach an accommodation here. You know, I'd be happy. I think Representative Kahn has been active on this issue as well and has been in the room in a lot of the negotiations with the Department of Health. I wasn't privy to those, so I really do defer to her. You raise a fair point, but as you know, there have been a lot of negotiations and a lot of drafts and a lot of versions of language to come to this point. I think we've reached a pretty good point. It's not going to satisfy everyone, but Representative Kahn may care to elaborate. I don't know, but that's the best I can do.
Representative Lomer.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Representative Simon. So, asking if Representative Kahn might want to answer that question.
She will yield.
Thanks.
Representative Kahn.
Madam Speaker and members, we think this bill is in reasonably good shape now with what's said. The problem that came up with all of this biological data issue was a very bad Supreme Court decision, which essentially destroyed the ability of the Department of Health to keep most of the data that they had accumulated and continue most of the work they were doing, which is highly advantageous to the people of the state. Having stored biological data, for example, when you may have someone may develop a symptom of problem, a malfunction that only comes up late in life, and be able to go, and could have been treated earlier, and be able to go back and find that person and that data and get them that information is incredibly useful. It's also useful that, you know, the Minnesota has been way ahead of the rest of the country on research in this areas. And so we've tried to, what the Breeder Supreme Court decision said was that the health department could not keep any data on any process unless they had specific legislative authority. So that's the problem that we've had, is trying to go back and give specific legislative authority for some of these issues. And it is a tug of war between the people who want to advance medical research and the people who think that privacy is the biggest concern at all. Well, we've had very adequate, very effective help from the people to whom privacy is the greater concern, and I think we've done a good job of coming to compromises on this. All the things in this bill does is allow the Department of Health to continue doing what they've been doing, and with the ability to look back and make further changes as needed.
Representative Lomer.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, I would just urge a no vote on this bill, because I just think this is very concerning that we are allowing the department to collect this data without individual consent. Thank you.
The member from Scott, Representative Albright.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Would Representative Kahn yield for a question?
She will. Representative Albright.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Kahn, on line 10.22, it speaks to, and this is maybe a follow-on to Representative Lomer's question and your response to it, but talks about including any rules adopted on or before June 30th, 2013. And I'm just curious if you could elaborate in terms of why we are suggesting that this be retroactive.
Representative Kahn.
I'm sorry, I missed the specific reference.
Representative Albright.
Page 10, line 10.22, Representative Kahn.
Representative Kahn.
The previous rules are exempted because that's what they need to keep continuing with the work that they've done before. This is then this requirement is being put into law now, and so the date that this requirement comes in will then take effect. So it would be too destructive to the work of the Department of Health to say that they had to go back and do everything to the conditions that we're putting in place now. So we're saying going forward after June 30th, which is when assuming that we're getting close to the effective date of the Act, is a much more reasonable compromise.
Representative Albright.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Then, in light of your answer, then this would align with the court decision that was just rendered? If she would yield, Madam Speaker.
She will yield. Could you repeat your question?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Kahn, in light of the answer, I'm just wanting to confirm then that this language would confirm and conform with the legal rendering by the Supreme Court?
Representative Kahn.
Yes.
Representative Albright.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Would Representative Kahn yield for one more question?
She will. Representative Albright.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Kahn, just a little further down on that page, then starting on on line 10.29 and reading through line 10.33. Just speaks to the Commissioner may collect, use, store, and disseminate biological specimens and health data to conduct program operations activities, public health practice activities, and health oversight activities unless required under other applicable law. Consent of an individual is not required under this subdivision. And I'm just wondering if you could cite an example where this provision would apply.
Representative Kahn.
Madam Speaker and Representative Albright, it would certainly apply for the information that we are required to collect by federal law. We are required to collect a certain amount of information and required to store it for at least 2 years by federal law. That would be a specific example. The other example, of course, would be in the places where we have specific language requiring informed consent and how that informed consent is gotten. But I think the federal law requirement for storage for a certain period of time is the most significant part of it.
Further discussion. The member from Sherburne, Representative Newberger.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I was wondering if Representative Kahn would yield to a question.
She will. Representative Newberger.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Kahn, I just need some clarification here. As we go through Section 10, we have our definitions here of biological specimens. We have these specimens include tissue samples, excretions, human DNA from someone that's identifiable individual, either living or deceased. It talks about using this information can be used for audits, civil, administrative, or criminal investigations, inspections, licensures. I'm just reading right from the House file of the bill. Forgive me, I don't have the Senate file handy. Licensures, disciplinary actions, civil, administrative, and criminal proceedings. You answered part of my question was the minimum, according to the federal standards, was 2 years that you were required to retain this data. I was wondering if you could, Representative Kahn, tell me what's the maximum? I don't see in the bill, maybe you could show me, but how long does this information stay on record for the state to use? At what point does the state decide they don't need it any longer?
Representative Kahn.
Well, I can actually give you a personal story to tell you when they decided they didn't need, which showed me how effective the State Department of Health collection was. I happened to come back on a trip from Cuba and was very sick as I came back. And I went to my doctor, who gave me very strong antibiotics and took a stool sample. Even though I had inveighed against people taking antibiotics without having the sample identified, I sure took them right away, and they actually worked right away. The thing that surprised me was that, I think this was kind of over a weekend, the thing that surprised me was before I got any call from my doctor, I actually got a call from the health department who wanted to know exactly where I had been and when I had been there. As soon as they heard it was a farm in Cuba and not a church supper in Bemidji, they lost interest in any possible ramifications. And I was assured in the course of this hearing that they have not retained that sample in any way. But we have samples are very different in terms of the kinds of things that they do. There are samples that can go to personal identity. And if you read down here, there are a lot of biological samples that are taken from a person and identified but have no identification value. And those are all covered by a different set of rules and a different set. One of the most important things that we need, and this is something that Representative Holberg and I have kind of agreed together and worked on together, going from newborn screening, is we need a very good method of informed consent and a very good method of explaining to people why it's valuable to have samples for themselves to have identified samples taken, and why it's valuable for all of society and no harm to anyone to have de-identified samples kept. So again, it becomes very complicated from research project to research project. I'm convinced that there are enough protections in this to allow both the science to go on and to allow the protection of the individual person.
Representative Newberger.
Thank you, Representative Kahn. I appreciate your answers, and I appreciate your willingness to work on this. When I look at the scope of what this covers, and I do understand that the minimum is 2 years, that they retain some part or all of this data. Like I said, I'm not seeing a maximum limit on this. I would urge members to consider that until that question gets resolved, but I would encourage a red vote on this. Thank you.
The member from Anoka, Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This is really interesting conversation. No, I just wanted to weigh in on the entire bill and say that I'm not happy with the overall bill, primarily because of this biological data portion and the DNA and those sorts of things. I'm not real comfortable that there's enough protections and that there's enough consent from individuals. And I hesitated on whether to vote for the bill today, but I think I will, because I think I'd like to work on making it better and making it, the language in it, stronger and more protective for the people of the state of Minnesota. But there are really good provisions in the bill, but I think those provisions that are good are outweighed by some of the negative things that could happen as a result of the collection of this data by the Minnesota Department of Health. Thank you.
Any further discussion to the bill? The member from Dakota, Representative Holberg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. And this is an issue that I feel passionately about and can have, if we do it wrong, can have some pretty big ramifications in people's lives. And I know many of you on the House floor, it's a rather dry issue and frustrating at times, but the bill that we have in front of us, I think, certainly needs more work, and I've discussed with Representative Freiberg some modifications to his email language in Section 1. As far as the MnDOT provisions, it needs a lot more work. I also I pulled an amendment to delete the Section 8 on the construction manager and general contractor data. I wanted to spare Representative Earhart some of the same questions on that section, but that certainly has more room for improvement as well. Representative Kahn and I over the years have worked on the genetic privacy information together, and a number of years ago put together a study group. I think there was 25 to 30 people. They met over a period of a year, made recommendations, and those recommendations provided the basis for the Genetic Privacy Act, which in turn was the basis for the Supreme Court decision that Representative Kahn and I have some disagreement over whether it was a good decision or a bad decision, but has put this issue before the legislature in a way that we have to deal with it, and it's a very complicating issue. We were able to set forth standards of consent related to newborn screening last year. Unfortunately, the Senate version of this bill undoes some of those provisions. I hope that the House conferees will work hard to uphold the agreement that was made on newborn screening. And I think that in talking with the Department of Health, the language, I certainly would like more robust disclosure and consent than what we see in the language of this bill. But this is a very time-consuming, complex area of law, and we've been assured by the study language that was put in the bill on the Scott Amendment that we'll get more information from the Department of Health, and some may be surprised that Representative Kahn and I are in probably more agreement than not on what standards of privacy should be for individuals and their biological specimens, genetic information, and that where you get into the balancing act is if there is a public health risk, are we going to allow for individuals to refuse consent and as a result would set forth a public health risk? So in the cases of communicable diseases, tuberculosis, we had the bird flu scare, etc., sexually transmitted diseases, we allow for collection and storage of some of those samples and information because we need the Department of Health to act proactively to ensure the health of the general population. So that's where the sticky wicket is. That's where the how do you balance this out, and the solutions are not easy and take time. So while what's in the bill is certainly not perfect, I have had a commitment from Representative Kahn that we'll continue to work on this issue. We'll get more information from the Department of Health prior to next year's legislative session, and I look forward to continuing dialogue with interested parties on just when should an individual have that right to privacy and when does the need for public health safety supersede that right. And I appreciate you indulging me a little bit today to make these points on the House floor, and thank you.
Representative Simon.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I obviously misjudged earlier when I spoke. I thought I was sort of wrapping things up. I didn't know how many people would want to be heard on this bill. But it is important stuff. I thank you, members. I think as you've heard today, we have a rough consensus. We don't have unanimity. We don't have total agreement. This can be some complicated stuff. We've got some great provisions in here that weren't the focus of the House debate so much. Representative Meyer's provision on the employment settlements, I think, is excellent. Representative Winkler's on disabilities. The Speaker's own provision, Representative Hortman's provision in here, I think is very good. And we have some great public safety language in here from Representative Schoen and Representative Lesch, among others. So, members, I urge you to vote yes. Let's go to conference, and I think we can resolve some of the issues we've discussed today.
The clerk will take the roll on the bill. The clerk will close the roll. There being 73 ayes and 58 nays, the bill passed as amended and its title agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for the day is Senate File 442. The clerk will report the bill.
Senate File 442 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to human services.
The member from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. Well, members, if you like helping a state agency, this is a bill for you, and if you like cutting government, this is the bill for you, because it's one of the most simple bills we're going to hear this year probably, and all it does is it comes from the Minnesota State Council on Disability, and they have requested to change their statute to reduce the number of members from 21 to 17. I ask for your support.
There are no amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File 442.
Third reading. The member from Fillmore, Representative Davids.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. This is a very fine piece of legislation. I hope everyone votes green.
Seeing no further discussion to the bill, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. The clerk will close the roll. There being 131 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is passed and is title agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for the day is Senate File 422. The clerk will report the bill.
Senate File 422 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to children.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Hilstrom.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. Members, this bill was brought to me by the Ramsey County Attorney, John Choi. Members, this issue has been around for 6 years. What happens when children are in foster care for a very long time and they're on the verge of aging out, it's clear they're not going to be adopted, and their parents have gotten their act together even after their rights have been terminated, there is no procedure in statute by which those children can be reunified, even if it is in the best interest of the child. Members, the groups who are interested in this area have been working on this issue for a long time, and they finally have consensus. At this point, they have agreement that says that if social services and the county attorney who did the termination believe that it is in fact in the child's best interest to be reunified, this would be the process by which that could happen. Members, I don't know of any controversy surrounding this bill any longer, and I would urge your support.
There are no amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File 422.
Third reading. Discussion. The member from Dakota, Representative Myra.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. We heard this bill in early childhood and youth development. Chair Hilstrom, thank you for bringing this forward. We heard compelling testimony of the benefits of restoration. However, I do have a few questions, and I was wondering, Madam Speaker, if Chair Hilstrom would yield for a series of questions.
Representative Hilstrom will yield. Representative Myra.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Chair Hilstrom, I was wondering what happens in cases of multiple children?
Representative Hilstrom.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. Thank you for asking that question. I did mean to speak about that. Every case will be done on a case-by-case basis, but in speaking with the county attorneys, they really believed that if a parent had gotten their act together enough that they were being able to be reunified with these children, that it would be very likely that they would meet the same standard for the other children as well. You just always have to make sure that you take into account the age of the children and their ability to care for themselves as well.
Representative Myra.
Madam Speaker, would Chair Hilstrom yield for another question, please?
She will. Representative Myra.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, Chair Hilstrom, I was wondering, is there any information on how many parents may see their rights restored by this law?
Representative Hilstrom.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. At this point, I don't know how many. I don't.
Representative Myra.
Madam Speaker, would Chair Hilstrom yield for another question, please?
She will. Representative Myra.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Chair Hilstrom, I was wondering, how does the reunification process get started?
Representative Hilstrom.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So the way the process begins would be that, of course, anyone can ask, and then social services and the county attorney's office who did the termination would then meet together after an evaluation was done to confirm that, in fact, they agree that it would be in the child's best interest. And then either social services or the county attorney would petition together.
Representative Myra.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Would Chair Hilstrom yield for one more question, please?
She will. Representative Myra.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Chair Hilstrom, last one, I've heard a little bit of concern about this issue. Is there any concern that children will cling to the false hope of reunification and it just doesn't happen?
Representative Hilstrom.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Myra, that has been my concern for a very long time and why I have killed this bill for the past 6 years. So I took this bill on as the author to make certain that we could get this right. And I believe that we have finally reached a balance that I can support and that the county attorneys and social services can all be on the same page.
Representative Myra.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, this is a good bill, and I'm going to be voting yes on it, and I would encourage you to do it as well.
Discussion. The member from Hennepin, Representative Loon.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Would Representative Hilstrom yield for a question?
She will. Representative Loon.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Hilstrom, thank you for your work on this bill, and I'm heartened to hear that you have had concerns and worked against this in the past, because I have some concerns. And I had a situation that happened in my district a few years ago. It wasn't with a child of this age. It was a very young child that was reunited and unfortunately ended in that child's death. So I'm just wondering, will there be some follow-ups? Will it be social services or someone doing some follow-up on reunification to make sure that it's going well once that child is placed back with the parent?
Representative Hilstrom.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And yes, and I want to make it really clear that one of the reasons why I was able to support this proposal now is that this really is about older children. This is about children who are on the verge of aging out of the system, have not been adopted, have clearly not been adopted, and that the families have really gone through the process of already proving that they are in a position that it would be in the best interest of the child. And so yes, the county system and the foster care system will have a responsibility to make sure that when they reunify that it really is in the best interest of the child and that the child is safe.
Representative Loon.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And would Representative Hilstrom continue to yield for another question?
She will. Representative Loon.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Hilstrom, and so in the case-by-case consideration, is there some contact that occurs now if a child's been removed and perhaps is in foster care? Is some contact of some kind maintained, and is that a consideration that the county attorney will look at?
Representative Hilstrom.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Loon, any time that termination of parental rights has happened, in many instances the relationship is over and there isn't contact. However, in some instances it is deemed to be in the child's best interest to maintain contact with extended family or other members of the family. And so really what this is about kids that need to have a family when they're done, whose family have gotten themselves back together again. Members, I have been really concerned about this issue for many, many years, and this bill is drafted in such a narrow fashion. It's really for kids who are aging out. It makes it so that if the child has been sexually abused in the family or had different types of issues, those are not allowed. And then the county really has to do an evaluation to say, is it in the best interest of the child? Not is it what the parent wants. Is it in the best interest of the child to be placed back in the home?
Representative Loon.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank you, Representative Hilstrom. You've made me feel much more comfortable in being able to support your bill. Thank you.
Discussion. Representative Holberg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members, and I rise in support of this bill. Many of you probably don't know, but my parents did foster care for 35 years. And in the early years when they were doing foster care, the standards were at all costs the children went back to the parents. And unfortunately we had children in our home that were obviously abused. They went back to the homes. I don't... This better, okay. They would go back to their homes, and I remember vividly a young girl and boy that came with severe bruises, black eyes. They stayed with us for 6 to 8 weeks. There was a court hearing, and in those days police reports were printed in the newspapers, and within a week of the children being returned to their home, the young girl was sat bare-bottomed on an electric stove. And it took a lot of work over a number of years for the system to actually put children first. And we have a real robust process in place in the state of Minnesota where there's time constraints, where we don't leave kids languishing in foster care for years, waiting for parents to get their act together. And I think that what we did as a state was important, and it was the right thing to do. And so it's not surprising that some people are somewhat concerned with this language, and we've worked on it over a number of years, and I think that the narrow window in which a child has to be 15 years old, the decision on whether or not this even occurs lies with impartial third party. The child is not even made aware of this as even being considered until the whole vetting of the standard and suitability of the parent is evaluated. We do have children that are 15, 16, 17-year-old that have never been adopted by anybody, that may have been through a number of foster care or group home situations. And I just think in those cases where parents have done the work, maybe they were drug abusers or had other challenges, mental health, etc. But if the parents have done the work and are back on solid footing and pose no risk to their own child, the ability to give a child some type of family is really important, and I think this is good legislation. It won't affect a lot of children, but for those handful that it does, it'll probably make a very big difference in their life to be able to be reunited with a parent or parents that have redeemed themselves, have made the changes, and are in a position where they could engage in a meaningful and positive relationship with those kids that really do need somebody to have that kind of relationship with. So I would urge a green vote.
Further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. The clerk will close the roll. There being 131 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for the day is Senate File 1016. The clerk will report the bill.
Senate File 1016 on the calendar for the day, the first and Grossman, an act relating to nursing.
The member from Rice, Representative Fritz.
Can you hear me? All right. Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. It gives me great pleasure to bring this before you today. I bring this agreement before you today because it has been, and it also has taken many, many years to complete. This bill updates the Minnesota Nurse Practice Act. And I, as a retired licensed practical nurse, or LPN, can tell you that the Nurse Practice Act has not been updated in over 40 years. Educational standards in nursing practice have evolved over the last 40 years, but the Minnesota Practice Act has not kept pace with how nurses are practicing currently. The proposed changes address the issues of removing barriers allowing for the evolution of the practice and provides greater clarity between the roles of the registered nurses and the licensed practical nurses. Using every nurse to their highest level of education and experience is best for patient safety and outcomes. With continued rising healthcare costs, utilization of every healthcare team member is crucial to achieving affordable quality healthcare. The Minnesota Board of Nursing worked closely with many stakeholders over the years and held over 30 listening sessions around the state to get this legislation right. I am pleased there is consensus between all interested parties, and I ask and appreciate your support and ask for a green vote.
There are no amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File 1016.
Third reading. The member from Anoka, Representative Abler.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I just rise to support this and remind even the members that even though this was a minute and a half, you commented, this has been years in the works and been hard fought. This was so controversial 3-4 years ago. There were almost fisticuffs, and so kudos to the board and the different nursing groups that worked it out. You can feel comfortable voting yes today.
Discussion. Representative Fritz. Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. The clerk will close the roll. There being 131 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for the day is House File 841. The clerk will report the bill.
House File 841, number 8 on the calendar for the day. The first engrossment, an act relating to human services.
The member from Washington, Representative Ward.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I also am happy to bring this bill to you. We're all interested in greater efficiency in government, and this is an example of how we can make those things happen. House File 841 modifies assessment requirements for medical assistance long-term care services. Federal government requires that medical assistance eligibility be established prior to eligibility for a waiver, such as the elderly waiver or the waiver covered services. This bill will allow counties to perform face-to-face assessment for home and community-based services prior to a final determination on eligibility for medical assistance, and that any necessary update to that assessment does not need another face-to-face assessment if the MA eligibility determination requires more than 60 days to complete. When an assessment is done, the clock starts ticking, and there are 60 days to get the completed paperwork. The financial statement often takes longer than 60 days, and in the past, the staff has been required to do another face-to-face intervention or assessment. All of you will think hard about people who are in need of medical assistance of this service and how difficult it would be to get a second face-to-face meeting. So that's just what we're setting aside. They still do need to have that assessment, but it can be done by the phone or internet, Skype, other ways. We don't have to bring a client in to have another face-to-face. This is bipartisan, non-controversial, and it passed unanimously in committee. I encourage you to vote green.
There are no amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 841.
Third reading. Discussion. The member from Anoka, Representative Abler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, and members. This is a bill brought forward by the wonders of technology. That'd be the telephone. Anyway, so it's overdue. It makes a lot of sense. My county supports it, and I think all the rest of them do, so please vote yes.
Seeing no further discussion to the bill, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. The clerk will close the roll. There being 131 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for the day is Senate File 840. The clerk will report the bill.
Senate File 840 on the calendar for the day, the second engrossment, an act relating to employment.
The member from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I believe we have an amendment to put the House language in.
There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Hansen moving to amend Senate File 840, the second engrossment as follows. Delete everything after the enacting clause and insert the language of House File 568, the second engrossment. The amendment is coded DEA 568.
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I'd like folks to adopt the House language. It's better than the Senate language.
All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. There are no further amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File 840 as amended.
Third reading. Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. The Senate file with the House file language is an issue that all of us are probably going to need to deal with at some time. I recently turned 50, and when you turn 50, you have a little reflection, and I also have a young child, and with a young child, we take our children when they're sick to the doctor. And many of us and many folks who are in the audience or out in the hallway or back at home, they have sick leave and they can take their child using sick leave. And the legislature recognized that over 20 years ago and put in statute the opportunity for people to use sick leave to take their child to the doctor. What this bill does is it reflects kind of today's reality where we may be taking our sibling, or we may be taking our parent, or we may be taking our grandparent to the doctor. Both of my parents are gone now, but if any of you have provided that caregiving responsibility, and many of us have, and many of us will. 1 in 6 Minnesotans provides regular care or assistance to a friend or family member who has a health problem, a long-term illness, or a disability. This provides an opportunity for employers and employees to work together for that employee to take their parent, their grandparent, or sibling to the doctor with sick leave that they have accrued. It doesn't offer a new benefit. It doesn't offer anything else except using that sick leave that they have accrued. Now, over the years, employers have provided different types of leave. Many employers don't have the traditional vacation or sick leave. They have leave that is available for folks to take. This bill would not affect that. This bill affects the traditional vacation leave and sick leave policy and provides for the employee to use sick leave to take their parent or their grandparent or sibling or other family members to the doctor. I'd ask for your support.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and Representative Hansen. I appreciate bringing this forward on this piece of legislation. However, I do have some questions about the cost of this. I did have distributed on the House floor. When this bill was done back in 2008, it showed that it had a local impact for our local units of government of $25 million in the first fiscal year and $26 million in the second, and increasing from there on out. I'm wondering what kind of feedback have you gotten from our local units of government? Obviously, this is going to cost them more. It's going to increase property taxes for citizens. What can you tell me of their kind of feedback from this?
He will yield. Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and Representative Anderson. I've had feedback from counties who are concerned specifically on the issue if they have employees where they're providing long-term sick leave to cover that cost with having an employee who may need to be covering those duties. I think the key thing and what we've done here in regard to state employees, is the language that was added in the House bill that makes it better than the Senate bill. We put an implementation date out. We reflect the collective bargaining agreements, which many counties have, and local units of government, so it doesn't change those. It can be used as we go through the transition with those agreements. I think when you look at the cost and the fiscal notes, there were actually 3 fiscal notes that were created in the period of 07 and 08. 2 of them had cost. 1 of them came back with, I believe, 0 cost. This bill was passed on a bipartisan basis at that time and was vetoed by Governor Pawlenty at that time. I think that we can achieve the sick leave and minimize the cost. I think we've done that by adding some of the provisions that Minnesota Management and Budget have raised concerns on. I think that discussion will continue in the conference committee, because the Senate bill is going to be different than if we pass this today. We've talked with the counties. We know that they have some issues with that. I think there's ways of resolving it.
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Hansen. I actually looked at the veto letter from 2008, and it expressed some concerns as far as even with this language, and I compared the bills from 2008 to this bill, even with this language, what we're going to see is that the collective bargaining agreements, the state law supersedes that. Attorneys are concerned that no matter what, this is going to be interfering with collective bargaining agreements. But that issue aside, what I'm mainly concerned with is the cost that we're passing on to our local units of government. And this was back in 2008. I'm guessing that it'll be even more now, considering different economies from 2008. That was $25 million for our local units of government, our cities and our counties, and moving upward pretty quickly. I think we need to be aware of that. I'm also concerned about the cost to the state government, and I know this went through Ways and Means. We didn't have a fiscal note, though, in Ways and Means, but we're looking at, from the fiscal note from 2008, of a cost to the state of over $10 million. And I'm just wondering if our budget targets reflect that cost of the $10 million. Perhaps Representative Carlson can yield to a question on that.
He will yield. Representative Carlson.
And just to repeat,
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and Representative Carlson. Just to repeat the question, we're looking at a cost of over $10 million to state government. Was this reflected as part of your budget targets, and what area of what different of finance bills is this cost carried?
Representative Carlson.
Madam Speaker, Representative Anderson, a number of days ago I had a conversation with Representative Hansen about the cost of this particular bill, and we also checked on, I guess this is the year of 08, a fiscal note that was done in 08, and the projected cost, according to this fiscal note, was that it would be negligible. And so in answer to your question, did we build a cost in for this bill? The answer is no, because we were relying on this bill being virtually identical to what was passed in 08, which had just a negligible cost. By the way, negligible in terms of Ways and Means is something that would be $3,000 or less, but we didn't have any number attached to this.
Representative Anderson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Carlson, for your response to that. I think this raises several different issues. Certainly the fact of that we have fiscal notes that vary vastly from year to year. We had a fiscal note just done in 2008 that showed a cost to the state of over $10 million on an annual basis. And then we also had a local impact note saying that the cost for our local units of government, our cities and counties, of $25 million and upwards. And I'm concerned that our fiscal note process and our local impact note process perhaps is flawed, especially if they say in 2008 that this cost is going to be $10 million, and now they're saying that the cost is negligible. I think that's really problematic for us as a legislative body when we're trying to make decisions and the impact that it'll have on our budget, not only now but going into the future. And I think that's something we should give thought to. I think we also need to be, I would argue that it's going to cost the state probably more than $3,000, and I think it probably would be helpful for us as a legislative body to come back after enactment of this and actually see what the true costs are, and hopefully our legislative auditor is tracking this issue so that we know in the end whether or not some of our fiscal notes are true to form, and I think that's something that we should do as a body. So that's my comments for today. Thanks, folks.
Discussion. The member from Wabasha, Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Wondering if Representative Hansen would yield for a question.
He will. Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Hansen, I'm reading the bill, and it says an employee, and then the new language, if authorized by the employer. Can you tell us what that means, if authorized by the employer? Does that naturally mean that they are provided that? Is it something that's authorized in the collective bargaining agreement? Is it the department head that makes the decision? Where does that authorization by the employer happen?
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Drazkowski, that language was in the Senate version, which we just changed in the amendment. So it is not in the House version, House language that you will be asked to be voting on. That if authorized by the employer is in the Senate file but not in the House file.
Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and Representative Hansen.
Representative Holberg. Discussion. The member from Washington, Representative Kiefer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Would the author be willing to answer a question?
He will yield. Representative Kiefer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In the research, and we did hear this bill in committee, the FMLA laws allow up to 12 weeks of the unpaid leave. And I can see where potentially this could be a problem with small, employers, and I won't say small because I think there's some restrictions on size here, but if someone has 12 weeks off and then they need to find a temporary, that could cost, and I'm just wondering, is there any provision, like if there's two people and it overlaps somehow, do you have any idea how that would work out, or does the employer have some discretion in that? Thank you.
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Kiefer, I think the employer always has discretion on managing the workflow. But I'm glad you brought up that point, because when we were in committee, I think it's important to look at the statute that we are amending here. That employer means a person or entity that employs 21 or more employees on at least one site. So I think that, just to be clear on where this affects, and when managing time and managing sick leave, and I was a supervisor in state government, I had to approve sick leave. I had to sign a sheet on that sick leave. So you can manage that, and you can work with your workers to make sure. And you know, as employment has changed, you have cross training. You have folks who have different job responsibilities and can cover sometimes when this is occurring. And you know, I want to kind of bring us back to the need here. If your parent has a heart attack and you have to be driving down to Rochester and providing care or responding to something like that, or you have some other diagnosis, I think that many employers and employees try to help out in those crisis situations. But in many times that immediacy can evolve into a longer period of time. That's where I think it's real important to have that employer communication as we work through sick leave.
Representative Kiefer. Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Would the author yield?
He will. Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Hansen, and I may have joined the debate here a little bit late, but does this apply only to government workers, or does it also apply to private sector employment?
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and Representative Drazkowski. The employer, just like existing law, is not only public, but it is private employers.
Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So would Representative Hansen yield again?
He will. Representative Drazkowski.
Representative Hansen, so what you are telling us is, and we did remove the language, and we're on the House language now, that says that it's not at the employer's discretion anymore, but basically the language says an employee may use personal sick leave benefits for all of these additional categories, essentially at their discretion, and we are telling private sector employers that that's the law, that they would need to respect at that point the employee's choice to do so. Is that accurate?
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Drazkowski, no. The employer has that discretion now without having that language that was put in the bill. An employer has the discretion of authorizing sick leave, as they do in the existing statute. What we're doing here is currently, and again I want to highlight that we're talking about when we have vacation leave and sick leave policies, when you have that separate designation and you have accrued sick leave. Right now, under the statute, for those requirements, if you've accrued sick leave, you can take a child to a doctor's appointment. What we're saying is you could, if this bill became law, that you would be able to take a parent or grandparent or other relative to using the leave that you have accrued. To come back to Representative Kiefer's question about employers, many employers, both in the private sector and the public sector, many counties have moved away from that traditional vacation and sick leave model to a flex leave model. This bill would not affect that at all because they're able to use, they're not being using vacation leave to cover that sick parent or grandparent. So employment has evolved. If there's an employer who has a flex leave policy, this doesn't affect them. If there's an employer that has the vacation and sick leave policy right now, if they're taking a child, if the employee is going to bring the child to a doctor's appointment, they ask for that leave, they take that leave as it's provided for in the current statute. We would be saying if you were going to take your parent to a doctor's appointment, you can use that leave.
Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Would Representative Hansen yield again?
He will. Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So, Representative Hansen, what happens, I'm especially concerned about the private sector, but the public sector as well. What happens in the case that an employer says, you know what, your job is that we need you to carry out here today is so critical that I can't have you leave here today? How does your bill affect that scenario?
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Drazkowski, it'd be the same issue now as if you had a child that had an emergency and you asked for sick leave from your employer. We're not changing any of the authority of the employee or the employer. We're adding that option for taking your parents. So currently, that employee can ask for sick leave to take a child to the doctor if there's an emergency. What the bill does is it says if you have an emergency with your parent or your grandparent or other relatives, that they can ask for sick leave to take to the doctor's appointment.
Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and Representative Hansen.
The member from Lyon, Representative Swidzinski.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Would the author of the bill please yield?
He will. Representative Swidzinski.
Madam Speaker, Representative Hansen, I was kind of thinking as this debate was happening, there's current protections from a employer-employee relationship when applying for a job, questions that can be asked, especially along the lines of whether you're married or having children. Do you see any troubles if this would get advanced? Obviously, we're looking at some potential, if you've got a sick parent or elderly parent that you may potentially be, is Alzheimer's, part history of your family. Are there going to be some issues there when it comes to some of those relational things, when it not just from children's standpoint, but now moving into forward, because this is going to have an impact on hours worked, and because of the nature of the business with older folks, not necessarily a once a year type sickness. This is ongoing things that have been going year after year, that there could be some potential legal implications as well. What do you think?
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and Representative Sosinski. I don't see any additional challenges there. I mean, I think of when my son may be sick, it seems like he gets strep every 3 weeks, and you've got to go take him to the appointment and have the test done going to urgent care. Having gone through this with parents, I mean, you go through a series of cycles here as they move through towards the end of life. And some of them you're anticipating, and some of them the phone call happens and you've got to respond. I think most employers are very sympathetic to that issue. And I wouldn't be doing this if we hadn't had the 20-year history in statute of having the law for taking children with sick leave. But I think we all are going to be dealing with this issue, and all of our constituents potentially, as we move through this aging process where parents and grandparents, siblings, adult children who may be disabled, we have that. The family wants to react, and I think that most employers are going to react well and favorably to that. We're just changing the existing law to allow for that accrued time to be used for taking the parent or the grandparent.
The member from Stearns, Representative Howe.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Would the author yield for a question?
He will. Representative Howe.
Thank you. And in the places that I've worked, I look at the term family and where it's allowed, and my parents and even my grandparents have always been in that mix. Isn't this getting in between the employer-employee relationship and what can be negotiated and what can be defined as family? Aren't we now interjecting state law in between that? And I understand we already have some of that established, but now I think we're expanding that, and I believe that, I think we should leave that alone. I guess I would ask, isn't that something we should leave that to the bargaining?
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and Representative Howe. If it were not that we already dealt with children in statute, I wouldn't be, like I said before, I would not be coming forward with this issue with sick leave. I think we have not had any opposition from bargaining units on this, to my knowledge.
Representative Howe.
Thank you. And would the author yield for another question?
He will. Representative Howe.
How many places, this hasn't been brought to me as an issue, have you had this brought to you by a number of employers or employees? I guess I'm questioning where this thing came from.
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Howe, I want to just clarify if I was unclear on the last answer, that not the bargaining units but the labor entities, I haven't had any opposition from the labor folks. You have on your desk a letter from AARP, Wilder Foundation, the Alzheimer's Association. They're very concerned in this. I've met with them. There are case studies, examples of folks with family members who are looking for that assistance. I also had the American Cancer Society indicate that they support the bill. Actually, one of the challenges as this was being initiated, bringing this back, although it was considered 4 years ago, was that some original proposals had specific diseases, whether it was Alzheimer's or that we would provide this for specific things. The bill is written to be inclusive, so we're not indicating one. That was actually the major policy challenge I had with the bill in talking with the interests who had family members who were dealing with these illnesses, not to be specific to those illnesses, but to have it broad enough so that it could react to the issues that folks are needing when they're dealing with sick family members.
Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have another question for the Speaker, or for the author, if he'd yield.
He will yield. Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So, Representative Hansen, if you didn't have this bill, what is the need for the bill? It seems to me, from the discussion here, that the employer has the ability to extend these benefits to the employee at their discretion now. Why do we need this bill? Why do we even need this section of law?
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, and Representative Drazkowski. I think it's the question of fairness. There are folks who are offering this now. There are employers that have the flex leave policy. This would provide a level playing field for those employers and for the employees, just as it is for folks who have accrued sick leave that can take their child to the doctor.
Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. One more question for the author.
He will yield. Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So Representative Hansen, I'm trying to ask it again in a different way. If you didn't bring this language forward, or if we didn't have this section of law, would those employers with the accrued sick leave be able to extend benefits similar, give permission to use, as says in law here now? Current law says right here on 116 and 117, this section applies only to personal sick leave benefits payable to an employee from the employer's general assets. Well, that's fair. It makes sense. Is there anything that says now, if you didn't have this bill or we didn't have this section in law, that an employer couldn't provide sick leave benefits, those same accrued benefits that you talked about bringing to a level playing field? Is there anything in law right now, or any reason, that the employer couldn't extend sick leave benefits to the minor or adult child, the spouse, sibling, parent, grandparent, or step-parent, just as your bill does?
Representative Hansen.
Madam Speaker and Representative Drazkowski, they could, but they may not.
Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and Representative Hansen. So, members, I think that's a distinction here. Rather than this bill providing permission, it basically creates an entitlement that does not require or does not bring with it the level of negotiation or level of decision making on the behalf of the employer that maybe has been discussed. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Winkler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Hansen yield to a question?
He will. Representative Winkler.
Representative Hansen, as I compare your bill and the Senate version, it looks like your bill is stronger, and the Senate version leaves a lot more discretion to the employer about whether they have to treat these kinds of individuals categories the same way. I guess I just would like to, you nodded yes, so you don't have to yield. The House bill is much stronger, and I guess I would let you know that as a member who plans to vote yes, the House version is very much the sense of what the legislature should adopt. And as you potentially go to a conference committee, I think it's clear that there should be a requirement. One of the reasons, members, is because in Minnesota, women make about 80% of what men make, even in the same fields and categories. And a big reason is that women tend to be the ones responsible for providing care for family members, not just children, but also adults, seniors, and all sorts of people. And that's one of the contributing factors to why women make less than men. And I think we need to start taking steps in the direction to provide and require more flexibility in the workplace for women, especially to help close the pay gap. And so, Representative Hansen, I strongly support your bill and hope that you can tell your Senate counterparts that the House has a very strong position in your version of the bill.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Hertas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In the private sector, benefits are arranged for the benefit of securing talented employment for a business owner. They look to offer different benefits to different groups of employees based on the particular talent that they have and what that asset will mean to their company. And these are negotiated things, and what I would have a concern what you're doing here is you're really going to perhaps cause something that is quite in the contrary of what you want to do. It may cause employers to not want to offer sick leave. That's one of the negative benefits or negative consequences, if you will, of what this could potentially do. And here we are as government injecting ourselves into the private negotiations and contracts between employer and employee. So I don't think it's a good idea. I certainly think that it's okay for an employer to allow people to use a sick leave as they design, but I don't think government should be injecting itself into it. And I would oppose this bill.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I want to thank Representative Hansen for bringing this bill forward. And I think that it is interesting that after hearing so much support expressed for the care for the elderly in this body just a couple of days ago as we debated the Health and Human Services bill, that I'm now hearing questions related to that very care. This bill will help seniors, the elderly in Minnesota, the sick in Minnesota. It'll also help workers and it'll help families, and that's why it's important. When my mom was sick and she died about 5 years ago, I had an employer that allowed me to use sick time so I could travel back to Wisconsin and take care of her. I'm the oldest of 5. We all took turns. She was real sick. We all took turns, and I had a great employer, and I didn't lose my job and I didn't lose my wages, and I was able to support my family and take care of my mother, which was my personal obligation, something I wanted to do. My employer really helped me do that, and it helped my mom stay out of the hospital, and it saved my whole family some money, and it allowed us to do the job we needed to do as a family to take care of her until she died. This bill will help people like me and lots of Minnesotans across the state, especially as we think about the aging population and the obligation that we all feel as family members to take care of our older and aging parents. It will help women and men who are on work meet that obligation to their family and keep their job and raise their families. It will help middle-class families do that. And it's going to help workers, all of the workers, especially those we were talking about who work in nursing homes, who work in low-wage jobs, who will have family members who need their help, who may not have this benefit unless we pass this bill. So I think our obligation really is to think about what this bill will do for families, for working people, and especially the elderly, our parents in Minnesota. This is a good bill. This is a helpful bill. It comports with the values I heard expressed on this floor when we debated the Health and Human Services bill and our support for the equitable and dignified care for seniors in Minnesota, and I sure hope you'll vote for it.
The member from Pope, Representative Anderson.
Thanks, Madam Speaker. I was thinking about this bill, thinking I was going to vote for it, but one of the comments that was just made gives me some pause for concern. Representative Hansen said that this bill would level the playing field. Well, I don't think the playing field in terms of what workers are paid is level. Some people make more than others. Some people get better benefits than other people. So to look at this bill as level the playing field, I don't know if I agree with that statement. I like the concept of the bill, but again, I still have doubts about this bill. Thanks, Madam Speaker.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. The clerk will close the roll. Quam votes no. There being 100 ayes and 31 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for the day is House File 1118. The clerk will report the bill.
House File 1118 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to bonds.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Freiberg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This bill was brought to me by the Department of Administration. It deals with sureties, which are bonding companies that insure the state or others on construction projects. The bill would remove an archaic requirement enacted in 1905 requiring two sureties who are freeholders of the state. The language is inconsistent with language passed in 1998 that describes how sureties should operate. The proposed change continues the use of surety bonds but puts the language in line with modern best practices. The bill was heard in Government Operations where it was not controversial, and I would urge a green vote.
There are no amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, 1118, House File 1118.
Third reading. Discussion. Seeing no discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. The clerk will close the roll. There being 119 ayes and 11 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for the day is Senate File 663. The clerk will report the bill.
Senate File 663 on the calendar for today, an act relating to state government.
The member from Nicollet, Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move that Senate File number 663 be re-referred to the Committee on Environment and Natural Resources Policy.
Representative Clark moves that the bill be referred to Environment Policy. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion prevails. The next bill on the calendar for the day is Senate File 769. The clerk will report the bill.
Senate File 769, number 9 on the calendar for the second engrossment, an act relating to public safety.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Rosenthal.
Thank you, Madam Speakers and members. This is a crime victims' rights bill. It is three main bodies. The first part of the bill gives data protection to victims when they are notified of an offender's release or change in status, and says that that data is private only to them and no one else. It makes a clarification in statute changing harassment to stalking, which was done in 2010, and makes stalking a crime of violence. And the final part of the bill is a restitution working group, which looks into how we pay restitution in the state, and report back to the legislature by January 15th of 2015, and then it sunsets. I'd like to thank Representative Cornish and Representative Holberg, who helped with the data practice parts of the bill, and there is an amendment, I believe.
There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Rosenthal moving to amend Senate File 769, the second engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A1.
Representative Rosenthal.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And what this does is take Section 1 of the House file, which Representative Holberg helped me draft, which had some problems, and inserts it into the Senate file. And I ask for your support.
All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. There are no further amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File 769 as amended.
Third reading. Discussion. Seeing no discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. The clerk will close the roll. There being 131 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is passed as amended and its title agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for the day is House File 790. The clerk will report the bill.
House File 790 on the calendar for today, an act relating to public safety.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Johnson.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Members, House File 790 is a bill that clarifies the periods of supervised release and conditional release are to be served concurrently, and the bill is supported by the Department of Corrections and the Community Corrections Act counties. The bill was brought forward by the Community Corrections representatives after a recent court ruling changed how we're to interpret current statute and essentially created a loophole that allow offenders that violate conditions of release to receive minimal consequences for the violation. And the purpose of this bill is to close that loophole. And just as a reminder to members, offenders that go to prison serve 2/3 of their sentence in prison and 1/3 on supervised release, and certain predatory offenders have an additional period of community supervision, and that's called conditional release. And conditional release is 5 years, 10 years, or lifetime. Now, the court has indicated that the current statute states that 2 periods of the release are to be served consecutively, and that's not consistent with what past practice has been. Part of their interpretation is that offenders that have returned to prison for a violation must be released at the end of their supervised release period, even if it's only a few days or a week. And the consequence cannot be carried into the conditional release period, even if it's in the interest of public safety, and that's where the rub comes in. The intent of this bill is to create the system as it was prior to the court rulings, and the original bill language comes very close, and the amendment that Representative Scott will be offering tweaks it even further to fully accomplish what we're intending to accomplish. So in summary, the bill, along with the amendment to be offered, closes a loophole that the court created in its ruling and will positively impact public safety, allowing our probation officers to enforce conditions of release with appropriate consequences. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Scott moving to amend House File 790 as follows. The amendment is coded A1.
The member from Anoka, Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to lay over temporarily the A1 amendment.
Representative Scott temporarily withdraws the A1 amendment. There's another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Scott moves to amend House File 790 as follows. The amendment is coded A2.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Johnson, for bringing this important bill forward. This, as Representative Johnson did say, this does close a loophole for offenders who are trying to cheat the system and serve less time. And also, it's clarifying language so that the courts fully understand what the intent of the legislation was. This amendment that I have says that an offender, while on supervised release, is not entitled to credit against their conditional release term for the time served in confinement for a violation of the release. And I would encourage a green vote on this and a green vote on the bill. Thank you.
Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I hope you support Representative Scott's amendment. It's a good amendment for public safety.
All those in favor of the amendment, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. To the A1 amendment. Representative Scott, would you like to offer the A1 amendment?
Oh, no, I'd like to withdraw the A1. Thank you.
Representative Scott withdraws the A1 amendment. There are no further amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 790 as amended.
Third reading. Discussion. Seeing no discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. The clerk will close the roll. There being 131 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is passed as amended and its title agreed to. Report from the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration.
Report from the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration. Murphy E. for the Committee on Rules. Pursuant to Rule 121 and 3.33 designates the following bill to be placed on the calendar for today for Monday, April 29, 2013. House File numbers 829, 938, 1138, 1389, 1221, 1470, and 1400, and Senate File numbers 345 and 1291.
Motions and resolutions. There are copies of the non-controversial motions at the House desk and online. If there is no objection, we will take action on these motions first. Hearing no objection, the motions prevail. Announcements. Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Just to let people know, we'll be back here tomorrow at 10 a.m. And with that, I move that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns until 10 a.m. Friday, April 26, 2013.
Representative Murphy moves that when the House adjourns today, it adjourn until 10 a.m. Friday, April 26, 2013. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion prevails. Representative Sanders.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Would the Majority Leader yield for a question?
She will. Representative Sanders.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Murphy, could you give us just a brief outline for the day? Is it your intention that we will come in and recess immediately for caucus, or will we just proceed with the calendar?
Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and Representative Sanders. It is my intention that we come in at 10, get ourselves organized, break for a brief caucus, and come back and take care of the bills.
Representative Sanders. Representative Zellers, for what purpose do you rise?
Privilege of the House, Madam Speaker.
Please state your privilege of the House.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Yesterday during the tax bill, things got a little cranked up, and I may or may not have said something about a particular beer wholesaler manufacturer. And when I got home last night, I got in the most trouble of all. Mrs. Zeller said, "Honey, I heard what you said last night on TV, and I am quite fond of the summer shandy that's produced by Leinenkugel's." And so I did a little research, and Jake, Dick, and John have been brewing beer for 145 years. My family's been making wheat for the last 134 years, so I think it's a good combination. So a little joke that I played last night got me in trouble at home last night. So most importantly, my apologies to the Leinenkugel family. They're a great family-owned business, but as it usually goes at our house, I'm sorry, honey.
Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move that the House do now adjourn.
Representative Murphy moves that the House do now adjourn. All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion prevails. The House stands adjourned until 10 a.m. Friday, April 26, 2013.